Chapter 491. The temperature in Jiangnan was much warmer than in Jingdou. Although the area around Suzhou and Hangzhou had also experienced heavy snow before, the snow clouds in the sky pulled directly from the seashore to the heart of the Qin kingdom, enveloping all of the fields and rivers in white snow. As the year passed and winter came to an end, the snow in Jiangnan stopped. Once the sun came out, the snow melted into ice. Immediately there was no longer a harsh chill. Even the branches of the trees on the side of the road outside Suzhou had already extended out tender little furry leaves. The current master of the Ming family, known as the wealthiest merchant in the world, Ming Qingda, was sitting in a pavilion on a small hill in Ming Garden. His gaze went over the tall courtyard walls and landed on the tender greenery between the trees. Although Ming Garden's courtyard walls were very high and once the doors were closed, it would become a heavily guarded fortress. However, these high walls could not block his gaze and could not hide the still weak but gradually burgeoning sense of spring. Although it was winter, he still hoped for spring. Ming Qingda sighed. A glimmer of light appeared on his tired and old face. He happily thought that winter was about to pass. The flowers and grass were about to come back to life. His Ming family, this enormous Ming family, should also come back to life. During this year, the Ming family had experienced too many changes. The enormous profits they had obtained from the palace treasury in the past had been halved. The various sales routes were endlessly harassed by the Overwatch Council. The flow of money, goods, and silver was very difficult. Gradually, it felt like the sun was setting in the west. Furthermore, the old matriarch who secretly controlled the Ming family had been forced to death by the imperial envoy. The third Ming master had almost been exiled, and suddenly, there was the seventh Ming master who had stolen the family property. Countless knives and swords chopped down on the Ming family's head, making it difficult for Ming Qingda to breathe. It was difficult for him to survive. He knew that behind the scenes of these things was the supreme being sitting on the dragon chair, and the executor was the gentle-looking but sinister imperial envoy Fan Xian. Fortunately, during this half a year, Fan Xian had basically stayed in Hangzhou and played in Wuzhou and Danzhou. He rarely returned to the Suzhou Palace Treasury Yamen to oversee matters, particularly in the 2 months before and after the New Year, when Fan Xian left Jiangnan and returned to Jingdou. Fan Xian left Jiangnan. The dark cloud hanging over the Ming family's head also moved away. Although the Jiangnan branch of the Overwatch Council was still working hard to carry out Fan Xian's orders and suppress the Ming family's business, the Ming family had deep connections in Jiangnan. They had countless officials helping them in secret, so the Ming family's business immediately came alive and welcomed a rare liveliness. That was why Ming Qingda had let out a happy sigh when he saw the tender branches outside the wall. However, his face immediately darkened because he suddenly discovered that he had been blinded by joy. Spring had come, the trees had sprouted, but the imperial envoy was also about to return. His mood immediately darkened. He rose angrily and, with a wave of his sleeve, walked toward his own courtyard. Ming Garden took up a large area. Most of the men of the 2 branches lived in the garden. Originally, according to theory, after the old Ming matriarch died, Ming Qingda, as the master of the family, should have moved into the old matriarch's little courtyard on the highest ground. However, Ming Qingda firmly did not agree to the proposal of the clan. Using the excuse that he missed his mother, he changed the courtyard into the Hall of Remembrance. He knew why he didn't dare move into that little courtyard. He was afraid that once he woke up in that little courtyard, he would see the white towel tied to the beam and that pair of little feet bouncing endlessly. That morning, Ming Qingda took care of some of the business and country matters under the clan in Ming Garden. He picked up a scalding hot towel and wiped his face vigorously. He felt a sense of exhaustion seeping out from his bones. This family was too big. There were too many things to worry about. In the past, as the master of the family, He could easily take care of the specific matters because the general direction and the collusion with the nobles in court were all handled by the old Ming matriarch alone. He didn't need to worry about it. Now it was different. He had to personally handle secret communications with Jingdo. What gave Ming Qingda the biggest headache was that the imperial envoy had never stopped suppressing the Ming family. With the threat of external aggression looming, there were problems within the Ming family. Fan Xian had forced Xia Qifei, that bastard, into the family through lawsuit. Furthermore, he had heard that the third Ming master had been very close to Xia Qifei recently. In front of the pressure of the court, Ming Qingda didn't have any good ideas. He could only watch as Xia Qifei approached the core of the Ming family step by step. On the first day of the new year a month ago, he had even watched as Xia Qifei returned to the clan to worship his ancestors. With internal troubles and external aggression, Ming Qingda couldn't hold on much longer, but he had to persevere. For this family, he had to endure until the eldest princess succeeded. He glanced at the two people beside him and sighed in his heart. The man and woman beside him were the people he trusted the most. One was his son, Ming Lansher. The other was the matriarch's personal servant girl in the past, and now his second concubine. If it weren't for this serving girl, it would have been impossible for Ming Qingda to completely take over the old Ming matriarch's secrets and become the true master of the Ming family. Thus, he had made sufficient compensation and love for this woman. As for Ming Lansher, Ming Qingda glanced at his son and furrowed his brows. He knew that Ming Lansher was capable and had good foresight. However, father and son had recently had a great conflict over the future of the Ming family. In Ming Lansher's view, since the court was suppressing so viciously and the palace treasury was firmly controlled by Fan Xian, it was already impossible for the Ming family to obtain large profits from the palace treasury like in the past. They should take advantage of the current period of peace and gradually withdraw from this business. Using the Ming family's large amount of land in Jiangnan and network in various places, they should no longer be a palace treasury royal merchant and turn to the import trade between Qin Kingdom and Dongyi. This way, the court and imperial envoy would be grateful. Secondly, they could protect the foundation of the Ming family. However, Ming Qingda firmly opposed this suggestion. Even though the Ming family was struggling to hold on, he still did not allow the family to have any intention of leaving the palace treasury and developing in another direction. The second concubine left the front hall. Ming Qingda looked at his son and furrowed his brows. "Your suggestion last night won't do." "Why?" Ming Lansher said unhappily. "Who can go against the court? If we don't retreat now when Fan Xian returns to Jiangnan, I'm afraid we won't be able to retreat even if we want to." "What can Fan Xian do?" Ming Qingda glanced at him and said. "Can he move troops and kill us all?" Who knows? That imperial envoy is the emperor's illegitimate child. If he really messes around, who would he be afraid of? Ming Lansher knew that Fan Xian would not use such a method, but he still couldn't resist saying it. "We also have people in the palace," Ming Qingda furrowed his brows. "The Empress Dowager, Empress, eldest princess. Are these nobles no match for the emperor's illegitimate child? Then what about the business? If Fan Xian continues to do what he did last year, how much silver will the Ming family have to put in to make up for the deficit?" Ming Lansher angrily said. "Before, in the palace treasury business, we could earn as much as we wanted. Now we are losing money on every deal. When the bids were set, the price was set too high. It is impossible to make a profit, and the Overwatch Council people make trouble every day, father. If this goes on, we won't be able to last much longer. In another 3 months, I think the clan will have to start selling land." "What's the rush?" Ming Qingda disagreed. "The palace treasury business must continue. This is what the eldest princess wants. If we leave now, perhaps Fan Xian will let us go, but how will we explain it to the eldest princess? Without the palace treasury bids, The Ming family is just a fat piece of meat that could be eaten at any moment. He didn't realize that he had said these words to his son a year ago. Then, at least send less goods to Dongyi, so we can lose less, Ming Launcher said probingly. Ming Qingda shook his head and said resolutely and decisively, "No. We can't offend Sigujian, we still need Taiping Money House's silver." Speaking of silver, the father and son fell silent at the same time. Under the full suppression of the court and Fan Xian, the reason the Ming family had been able to hold out until now and keep the family's fertile land was all because of their good relationship with Dongyi and the endless supply of silver from Taiping Money House and Zhaoshang Money House. What if? I'm saying what if, Taiping Zhaoshang feels that our family can't hold out and wants to collect silver? Collect silver? What we're mortgaging is the land and business, Ming Qingda smiled coldly. What use is there for the money house to take so much? Can they sell it? They can only continue to support us. Otherwise, what they take back is just some dead things that can't make money. What should we do? Endure. Ming Qingda stood up and tightened his fist slightly. He coughed and said firmly, "As long as there are no problems with Taiping Money House and Zhaoshang Money House, we can endure. Even Fan Xian can't do anything to me." How long do we have to endure? Ming Launcher looked at the ups and downs of the family this year. His spirit could not hold out much longer. Endure until Fan Xian falls, endure until the emperor knows he was wrong. Ming Qingda's eyes were sunken. There was a glimmer of ruthlessness in his exhaustion. Even if it's 2 or 3 years, we have to endure. We have to wait for movement from Jingdo. Right now, there are too many places in the family that need silver. I'm afraid we'll have to continue moving silver from the money house, Ming Launcher said worriedly. The clan's share was forced to give a share to Xiaqifei. Ming Qingda closed his eyes and calculated. Even if the third and fourth aunts have ulterior motives, they don't have much on hand. Most of it is in our hands. As long as the money house doesn't cross the line, it will be fine. Although the scheming and farsighted merchant did not think that Taiping Zhaoshang Money House would suddenly pull out firewood from under the pot, he, who had always been cautious, knew that he had to keep the risk to the lowest. The street in Suzhou full of money houses and pawn shops was not very long. The stone-lined street appeared particularly quiet. Those who could come here were either poor to a certain extent or rich to a certain extent. As the successor of the Ming family, Ming Launcher was the latter. When he quietly came to the money house with the Zhaoshang banners, he was immediately respectfully welcomed in by the head shopkeeper of the Zhaoshang Money House. Ever since Fan Xian had come to Jiangnan, the Ming family's efforts to transfer silver outside had increased, particularly with the palace treasury bidding. Even with the powerful power of Taiping Money House spread throughout the world, they were unable to raise so much silver in a short time. Thus, the Ming family took a risk and asked Zhaoshang Money House for help. Unexpectedly, Zhaoshang Money House agreed with great difficulty. This cooperation left a very good impression on the Ming family. After carrying out a detailed background investigation, the Ming family confirmed that the source of Zhaoshang Money House's funds came from the inheritance of Shen Zhong's family, the commander of the Northern Qi Brocade Guards, as well as a family in Dongyi. Thus they relaxed. The cooperation between the two sides increased day by day and was seamless. Zhaoshang Money House had already become the Ming family's largest partner other than Taiping Money House. In a year, the Ming family had already moved out more than 3 million liang of silver from this money house. Ming Launcher had come again to transfer silver. The two sides very familiarly signed the contract and notarial deed and completed each other's procedures. The head shopkeeper of Zhaoshang Money House suddenly revealed a difficult expression and said, "Young Master Ming, there is something I don't know if I should say." Ming Launcher furrowed his brows slightly, but his heart thumped. He wondered if Zhaoshang Money House had suddenly developed some kind of suspicion toward the Ming family. As expected, the plain-looking head shopkeeper probingly said, These 2 months have been good, but I heard, the imperial envoy is about to return to Jiangnan. Ming Launcher huffed coldly. The entire world knew that his family was not on good terms with the imperial envoy, but Zhaoshang Money House had not been afraid before. Why were you afraid now? The head shopkeeper smiled warmly and said, the Ming family has been dominant in the Jiangnan business world for 100 years. Naturally, our little money house would not suspect anything. However, let me remind you, there are many money-making businesses in this world. Why must you fight against the court? Ming Launcher's heart jumped. This perfectly matched his intention of moving the Ming family onto another path. However, he was, after all, not directly involved in the Ming family. He also had a glimmer of suspicion toward this head shopkeeper's sudden reminder. In front of this outsider, he wouldn't say anything. He smiled slightly and said, what business can make more money than the palace treasury? The head shopkeeper chuckled and didn't say anything more. After the Ming family's carriage left the street made of stone, the head shopkeeper of Zhaoshang Money House bent his body slightly and returned to the heavily guarded inner storeroom at the back. The storeroom stored silver and bills from various places. It was clear that the head shopkeeper placed great importance on the Ming family's bill of exchange in his hand. He carefully placed it in a separate wooden box and glanced inside. The bills inside were already very thick. If Zhaoshang Money House forced the Ming family to pay back the money, the Ming family would not break their contract with the court and break away from the palace treasury sales. Then, they could only sell off their rich family property to pay back the money. Of course, Zhaoshang Money House would not do such a thing. The head shopkeeper suddenly thought of something and smiled at the assistant beside him. How much silver has the sixth master borrowed? It has already exceeded the limit, the assistant said respectfully. He greatly admired the head shopkeeper's methods because he knew that Zhaoshang Money House now actually owned nearly half of the Ming family. Although the value of the Ming family's property was definitely more than this, things like wealth, once reflected on bills, would always shrink a lot at a rather clever moment. That customer has a seal? Yes. The head shopkeeper nodded. He knew that his master was preparing to take action. However, hadn't he still not returned to Jiangnan? In the side room behind Zhaoshang Money House, the head shopkeeper saw the green banner at a glance and respectfully asked, Sir, what should we do next? 13th Wang had come to Zhaoshang Money House the moment he entered Suzhou. He knew of the cooperative relationship between this money house and the Ming family, but he had never thought, no one in the world would have thought, that this money house was Fan Xian's. His lips tasted bitter. He once again felt why his teacher valued Fan Xian so much and why he had him represent a portion of his attitude. He also knew that the words Fan Xian had said to him in that broken temple were not false. Zhaoshang Money House already had enough of the Ming family's promissory note. In this matter, he was only a hired thug to collect the debt. It was impossible for him to change all of this. Even if he notified Dongyi and the Ming family right now, it was impossible to change what was already set in stone. The Ming family was finished. More accurately speaking, before Ming Qingda knelt in front of Fan Xian and secretly killed the old Ming matriarch, using a mournful attitude to ask for the sympathy of the world and delay Fan Xian's lightning strike, the Ming family was already finished. All of the Ming family's efforts were superfluous actions and a powerless struggle. The reason Fan Xian had never taken action was because he had previously had to deal with the pressure from Jingdo. For him to take action now, it must be because he knew that the nobles in Jingdo no longer had the extra power to help the Ming family. 13th Wang furrowed his brows and wondered what method Fan Xian would use to delay the eldest princess' support for the Ming family in Jingdo. I don't understand these things. 13th Wang sighed. When are you going to collect the debts? I'll go with you. The head shopkeeper smiled. A long time ago, he was a successful official in the Ministry of Revenue. Now, he was a successful usury operator. When it came to clearing shops, He was very good at it. There will be more actions from the owner's side. I'll have to trouble you to wait a few more days in Suzhou. 13th Wang thought that if Fan Xian wanted to clear out the Ming family, relying on promissory notes alone would not be enough. What other actions would he take? Fan Xian's actions in Jiangnan began early because he needed this time difference. The Jingdou actions that truly led to the Jiangnan actions also slowly began at this moment. One day in February, the owner of the Dongi embroidery shop, who had been dragged around until his head was in a mess, finally received a piece of good news. The banknotes he had sent out had worked. Tomorrow, yes, tomorrow, the embroidery cloth would enter the palace. Tomorrow, yes, tomorrow, the monthly tickets will stop doubling. Everyone who still has tickets in their hands, toss them over. Thank you. Chapter 492. The second month was the spring equinox. Flowers bloomed and withered according to the time. It was not yet time for the 100 flowers to rise to the sky. Temporarily, one would plant the spirit of spring with skillful hands. Where was the spirit of spring planted? It was planted on people's clothes. The petals fluttered and folded in the golden embroidery. The day before, the Western embroidered cloth that the Empress had requested had finally entered the palace. No one knew how many bolts of cloth there were, but it had worked a number of eunuchs in the palace. The person who had brought the cloth in from outside the palace was Hong Zhu. For a small matter like distributing it today, a small matter that required physical strength, he was too lazy to do it himself. He stayed in the main hall of the Eastern Palace and noticed that the Crown Prince was not there. As he carefully pulled out the brass pieces in the incense burner to prevent the incense from burning too quickly, he quietly ordered the serving girls to be more diligent and quickly spread out the 3 layers of cotton mattress because the Empress would be reading in a moment. Before long, a wave of fragrant wind brushed past. The inner curtain was lifted. The Empress, with black brows, red lips, and a pair of flowing red phoenix eyes, walked out with a slight limp. She reclined on the low couch and drank the freshly brewed incense while reading the book in her hand. The book was a collection of stories published by Donbo Bookstore. Although the Empress hated Fan Xian and feared him, in her daily pastimes, this mother of the country did not want to lower the quality of her life. After skimming through a few pages, the Empress' brows furrowed. No one knew what she was thinking. At this moment, Hong Zhu was behind the Empress massaging her back. That pair of exceptionally clean little fists gently and orderly smashed into the Empress's thin body. The Empress had always liked Hong Zhu's playfulness and attentiveness to his service, particularly his skill at massaging her back. Today, she did not close her eyes to enjoy it as she usually did. Instead, she stared at the book in front of her in a daze. "What are you thinking about, Empress?" Hong Zhu asked with a slight smile. Compared to these nobles, the eunuchs and serving girls in the palace were like ants in the mud. Thus, when normal people saw nobles like the Empress, they didn't even dare to breathe too loudly. They were timid and respectful, wishing they could pull back their hands and feet. However, Hong Zhu had once received Fan Xian's teachings. He also felt that although these nobles seemed to have a high position and power, wore luxurious clothes and ate good food, and had nothing to be dissatisfied with, it was these nobles who easily felt that life in the palace was boring and lonely. They liked people to talk to them. Ever since Hong Zhu had served in the royal study, he had been different from other eunuchs. He would not always lower his head and never forget to act like a servant. Rather, other than being respectful, there was a hint of magnanimity in the way he handled matters. In fact, the reason was very simple. The nobles in the palace also needed to talk, but their status meant that they had no close friends to communicate with. If the little eunuch who had always been by their side didn't look so wretched and act so bashfully, they would feel much better. That was why Hong Zhu was loved by so many nobles, including the Empress. The Empress seemed to be used to talking to Hong Zhu. She sighed and said, "I was just thinking. I am tired of always being in the palace. and has been a vegetarian and chanting scriptures these 2 days. I haven't had many opportunities to see her." Hong Zhu smiled and said, "It is good for me to accompany you and talk for a while." He had to say that he was a slave, but he couldn't put on the appearance of a lowly slave. Otherwise, the master would only have the desire to slap him in the face when he saw the lowly slave, and would never have the thought of communicating with him. "What can you say? Why don't we do what we did a few days ago and tell us about the days you spent wandering outside the palace when you were a child?" the Empress asked with interest. After Hong Zhu's family was ruined by corrupt officials, he and his brother fled to Jiaozhou. In those years, who knew how much suffering they had suffered and how many joys and sorrows of the human world? In terms of experience, he was much richer than these nobles who had grown up in noble families. Especially the secrets of the beggars, the rumors of the Jianghu, and the eating and playing of the common people. When they fell into the ears of the Empress, they seemed so fresh and interesting. Today, Hong Zhu was telling a true joke he had heard on his wanderings. It had to do with the girls in the brothels. After all, he was in the royal palace, and the person listening to the story was the mother of the country. Thus, Hong Zhu was particularly careful when he told the story and didn't dare to say too many explicit words. As the Empress listened to this story, a ripple appeared in her eyes. She smiled slightly and felt that it was amusing. She quickly yawned to hide it. She was in front of Hong Zhu, so he couldn't see. He just felt surprised that the Empress didn't stop him from continuing. After all, he was young. How could he know that no matter how sacred and inviolable a noble was, in reality, the things in their minds were no different from those of the women in the marketplace? After he finished the story, the Empress sighed and said, "The children of the common people do indeed have a hard time, but they can also see some different things." Hong Zhu smiled awkwardly and said, "It's hard. What kind of person is the Empress?" Since childhood. This naturally led the topic to the Empress's childhood. For a moment, the Empress was lost in thought. She thought of the present emperor. When she was young, he was still that unsmiling cousin. It seemed that they had occasionally had happy times together. However, later on, how did it become like this? She immediately thought of the price her family had paid on that night when Jingdo bled with blood. Her emotions began to become unstable and gradually gained a sense of sorrow. Hong Zhu carefully controlled his words. He used his peripheral vision to watch the frequency of the Empress's eyelashes blinking. He then turned the content of the conversation to the little playthings of the Empress in her childhood. At this moment, the Empress was warning herself in her heart. Furthermore, she couldn't tell a servant too much about herself. Hearing him change the topic, her heart relaxed and she began to count like she was counting her family treasures. After countless twists and turns, Hong Zhu finally succeeded in, without leaving a trace, making the Empress think of a piece of jade. A piece of jade that she had brought into the palace from her paternal family. The Empress gestured at the size of the jade and said with a smile, "The quality of that piece of jade is not bad. Of course, it can't compare to the tributes stored on Dong Mountain. However, it would still be a rare quality in a normal noble family. Oh right, that was given to my paternal family by the previous emperor. Thus, the engraving on it is the emperor's style. It is impossible to wear it outside." The Empress unintentionally pointed at her chest. Although she was wearing a thick winter coat, her fingers still sank into her ample bosom. Hong Zhu gently swallowed and quietly said with a smile, "I don't think I've seen the Empress wear it in the palace. Although that jade pendant is quite warm, the water is too shallow. I used to wear it when I was a girl, but it doesn't suit me now." Hong Zhu fawningly said, "Your Highness is a heavenly beauty, not less beautiful than before. What difference is there between you and a girl? No matter how shallow the water, it is still suitable." A stern look flashed in the Empress' eyes. She lowered her voice and shouted, "Your words are getting more and more impudent." Hong Zhu's expression was filled with shock. He quickly slapped himself heavily in the mouth, but he still did not notice the trace of a satisfied smile at the corners of the Empress' lips or the growing meaning in her eyes. Yesterday, the Empress had learned of the news of the embroidered cloth entering the palace. Naturally, she did not worry about such a small matter. Naturally, there were rules in the palace to send it to the various palaces. The Empress Dowager's side was the first, as well as the famous ladies in the palace. In the end, it was the eldest Princess Guangxin Palace. Although the Empress had never liked this sister-in-law, for the sake of her son, she had to be careful. At this time, the back room of the Eastern Palace was busy distributing the embroidered cloth. After Hong Zhu served the Empress, he had nothing else to do. With nothing to do, he stood outside the door and stared at the slender serving girls busying about. His gaze swept across the serving girls' full and slightly perky buttocks. Suddenly, he felt a pain in his waist. Turning his head to look, he saw a charming palace maid glaring at him hatefully. He couldn't help but scold in a low voice, "Sure, you're crazy. There are so many people, and this is in the palace." This serving girl, who was brave enough to pinch the head eunuch in the Eastern Palace, was the Xior that Fan Xian had once heard of. She was also the companion that Hong Zhu had found in the loneliness of the palace. Xior bit her lower lip and muttered, "Where are your eyes looking? You also know this is in the palace?" Hong Zhu chuckled and said a few words of comfort. He thought to himself, as a eunuch, he could only use his eyes and fingers to satisfy his cravings. What was there to be jealous about? He didn't think much of it. However, he suddenly thought of something and asked curiously, "What are you doing here?" His heart suddenly jumped. Lowering his voice, he said, "Don't tell me she wants you to go to the various palaces to deliver embroidered cloth?" Xior looked curiously at his nervous expression and said with slight surprise, "No. I don't know what happened today, but the Empress suddenly remembered a small object that she hadn't used in a long time and wanted me to go into the side room to look for it." Hong Zhu's mood relaxed slightly. He carefully asked, "What object is it?" "A light green jade," Xior pouted. "I don't know who was the one who talked too much and made the Empress think of this thing. It's something that hasn't been used in many years. How could she find it in such a short time? If she can't find it, how will she explain it to the Empress?" Hong Zhu was overjoyed. He knew that what he said earlier had finally had an effect. The Empress had finally remembered to find that piece of jade. At this moment, a serving girl covered her mouth and laughed as she walked past the two of them. Xior angrily said, "What are you laughing at?" The serving girl stuck out her tongue and said, "Only you guys can laugh, but I can't?" The Qing Kingdom's kingdom was actually not as bright and grand as the common people imagined, but it was also not as dark and terrifying as the novels made it out to be. Particularly in the Eastern Palace, the Empress was well aware of her weakness and helplessness, so she purposefully put effort into these details. She was relatively gentle toward the serving girls and eunuchs, and not very strict with the emperor. She had the intention of building a good relationship. Hong Zhu was also someone who was used to being careful. Even though he had become the head eunuch, he was not very bossy toward the people below him. That was why the serving girl dared to joke around with the two of them. "Where are you going?" Hong Zhu smiled slightly as he looked at the serving girl, as well as the little eunuch holding 2 rolls of high-quality embroidered cloth behind her. The palace maid giggled and bowed, saying, "This is for Guangxin Palace." Hong Zhu smiled and nodded, allowing her to go. The serving girl was called Wang Zhe. To have a surname meant that she was a rather favored figure in the Eastern Palace. She brought 2 little eunuchs to Guangxin Palace. Knowing the eldest princess's habits, she waved her hand and had the 2 little eunuchs wait outside while she laboriously carried the embroidered cloth in. Naturally, there were eldest princess serving girls in the palace to receive it. Since it was someone representing the Empress, the eldest princess casually said a few words to the serving girl, asked after the Empress, and sent her out. When Guangxin Palace was quiet and empty, the eldest princess moved behind the screen and looked at the Qin Kingdom's crown prince, whose face was full of happiness. Smiling warmly, she said, "Have you memorized the 3 strategies for governing a country?" The crown prince gazed at her with infatuation and nodded his head. Gently holding the eldest princess' soft, almost boneless hand like he was holding a fragile and easily broken piece of jade, he brought it to the side of his face and rubbed it against it. In a quiet voice, he said, "Qian'er has already memorized it." The eldest princess gently used a finger to touch the spot between his brows. Looking at the familiar mark between the crown prince's brows, for some reason, her heart throbbed and then softened. Using both hands to hold his face, she moved her eyes slightly and said in a gentle voice, "Be good, recite it for me." In the Eastern Palace, the Empress was throwing a temper tantrum because the serving girls had searched for a long time and still hadn't found Shui Qing'er's jade. This made the Empress in a bad mood. Xior stood fearfully by the Empress's side. She thought to herself, "Why does this mistress have to work so hard on that piece of jade?" She had no idea that the Empress had been moved by Hong Zhu's words and wanted to find some of the tale of time from many years ago. "Search carefully for me." The Empress was very angry. She had only occasionally wanted to find something, but in the end she couldn't find it. She was lenient, but these servants dared to overturn the heavens. She had faintly heard that there were people with dirty hands and feet in the palace, but she had never thought that there would be someone so daring as to stretch their hands into the Eastern Palace. Thinking of how she was alone and without help in the royal palace, and was now being bullied by these dog servants, the Empress was so angry that her lips trembled. She coldly said to the row of eunuchs kneeling in front of her, "If you can't find it in the storeroom, then search every room." The expressions of the row of people kneeling below were very ugly. They all thought to themselves, "Are they preparing to raid the palace?" The 3 eunuchs on the lower right were so scared their faces were deathly white. Their hearts were filled with shock. All of the old, unused items in the Eastern Palace had been stolen out of the palace by them to be sold. The piece of jade the Empress had mentioned earlier was among them. Fortunately, everyone had been frightened badly by the Empress's sharp and dark scolding. Their expressions were not very good, so the little drum in the hearts of the 3 eunuchs was not detected by others. The Empress slammed her right hand heavily onto the table. The emerald ring on her right middle finger shattered with a crack. She angrily said, "Find out who has dirty hands and feet. There's no need to report to me, just directly kill them." Hong Zhu lowered his head and looked at the pieces of emerald on the table. He smiled bitterly and thought that this ring was worth much more than the jade. He knew that the Empress wanted to suddenly have an idea and be angry in her heart. She wanted to use this to establish her power in the palace, so he couldn't say much. He bowed slightly and accepted the order. He then led a few high-ranking serving girls and eunuchs to search the palace. In an instant, there was a flurry of footsteps in the side courtyard behind the Eastern Palace. The sound of chests and cabinets being overturned rang out. It was like a raid. It made one's heart tremble unspeakably. The serving girls and eunuchs who were obediently waiting outside the door for their fate's orders were not very worried. Even the 3 eunuchs who had handled it were not afraid. They had done this kind of thing many times. No one would be stupid enough to hide the taboo stolen goods in their own rooms. However, it seemed that some people were indeed that stupid. The 3 eunuchs were dumbstruck. The serving girl who had been looking at them with an arrogant expression suddenly paled. In a sharp voice, she said, "This isn't mine. This isn't mine." In order to avoid arousing suspicion, Hong Zhu did not personally go in to search. When he saw a eunuch find the jade from under the serving girl's bed, he couldn't resist sighing. Gazing at the serving girl, he shook his head. This serving girl was the one who had sent the cloth to Guangxin Palace earlier. Her face was deathly pale, and her eyes were filled with confusion. With a bang, she knelt in front of Hong Zhu and said in a trembling voice, "Young eunuch Hong, it has nothing to do with me, nothing to do with me, nothing to do with me." The three eunuchs who had truly stolen the jade looked at each other. They thought, hadn't this jade already been sold out of the palace? How could it suddenly appear in the Eastern Palace, and in the hands of that serving girl? The three eunuchs immediately broke out in a cold sweat because of the appearance of stolen goods. Who knew what problems would arise from the interrogation later? Hong Zhu furrowed his brows and looked at the serving girl kneeling in front of him. He sighed and said, "Tie her up and wait for the lady's orders." A few of the sturdier eunuchs went forward and flipped the serving girl to the ground. They used hemp rope to tie her up securely. The serving girl was already unconscious from fear. She could only endlessly cry out that she had been wronged and say she had never seen this piece of jade. Hong Zhu shook his head and went to the front of the palace to report. The three eunuchs looked at each other. One of the braver ones followed behind Hong Zhu and said in a low voice, "Sir, earlier, the lady's intention was to find the thing and directly beat the lowly one to death. If we tell the lady now, I'm afraid she won't be happy. It wouldn't be good to implicate you." Hong Zhu stopped his steps and thought for a bit. "This matter is too big. It's best to wait for the masters to speak. As servants, we shouldn't meddle too much." A glimmer of disappointment flashed through the eunuch's eyes. He had originally wanted to borrow Hong Zhu's hand to directly kill the serving girl. Then, no matter how the jade entered the palace again, as long as the person was already dead and the jade came back, it would not be traced back to him. He had not thought that Hong Zhu would still go ask for the Empress's orders. How could it be so simple? Hong Zhu smiled coldly and glanced at him. How could she be so daring to steal something from the palace alone? There must be someone else helping her cover it up. Even if there wasn't a helper, where did this thing come from? In a bit, we will have the people of the internal court investigate it carefully. We will certainly be able to find the source. The eunuch's heart chilled. He thought to himself that the source, if the investigation continued, wouldn't the three of them be pulled out? No matter what, he did not dare to admit this matter to Hong Zhu. He only asked probingly, "I wonder how the Empress will deal with this. If they truly find the scourge in the palace, beating her to death is good. I'm just afraid that she will be thrown into the celestial prison and tortured by the Overwatch Council." Hong Zhu sighed. The eunuch's eyes turned and he swallowed fearfully. After all, this is a palace matter. If the people of the internal court and Overwatch Council investigate, I'm afraid the Empress will lose face. How about we investigate it ourselves first? Hong Zhu seemed to be moved by these words. Glancing out of the corner of his eye, he happened to see a glimmer of murderous intent in the eunuch's eyes. He smiled and nodded his head, ordering, "Investigate it carefully." When they arrived at the bedchamber in the front of the palace, Hong Zhu's expression changed. He first told the Empress the information he had already found. He then sincerely urged the Empress to deal with the matter with leniency. After all, the Empress Dowager had been on a vegetarian diet these days. If someone died, she would probably not be happy. The Empress was originally very angry, but after Hong Zhu's persuasion, her anger gradually dissipated. She held Shui Qing'er's jade in her hand and slowly stroked it. Furrowing her brows, she said, "That makes sense. However, death can be forgiven, but punishment cannot be avoided. Give the order to beat him heavily." Hong Zhu accepted the order and was preparing to go to the back when the Empress called him back and said, "What are you going to do? Just give the order, stay here with me. I've always heard you boast about your dexterity with your hand. Weave a golden thread to tie this piece of jade together." The Empress's expression was calm. No emotion could be heard from her. Hong Zhu was secretly happy. He thought to himself that if he was asked to lead the investigation, who knew if he would be dragged into it? After an indeterminable amount of time, a eunuch knelt outside the palace with an ugly expression. Hong Zhu furrowed his brows and went over to listen to him say something. His expression also became ugly. He moved closer to the Empress's ear and quietly said a few words. The Empress's beautiful brows furrowed, and she said with disgust, "How inauspicious! It's fine if you can't take a beating, but at least you have some sense of shame and know to commit suicide to be clean." This mother of the nation casually said, "Have Jingle Hall drag it away and burn it." Hong Zhu's heart trembled slightly. He knew that in the eyes of these nobles, servants like him were only objects to be ordered around and toyed with. Human lives were not worth as much as ants. He silently bowed and then went to make arrangements for the serving girl's funeral. He knew that the serving girl's death was certainly not as simple as suicide. It had to have been secretly done by the eunuch. He had arranged to interrogate her in order to silence her and protect his glory, wealth, life, and wealth. However, this was something Hong Zhu had arranged, so he was not very surprised. He only felt a glimmer of guilt toward the innocent serving girl. The Qing kingdom's royal palace was very large, taking up a quarter of Jingdo's area. Inside lived the noblest men and women in the world, as well as the lowliest women and people who were neither male nor female. In this cold palace, who knew how many stories happened every day? Who knew how many lowly people would mysteriously or silently disappear or die, and no one would remember that they had ever existed in the palace? Although the Qing royal family was not known for their strictness, this kind of strict barrier between classes meant that the royal palace would forever be a dog-eat-dog place. Thus, the death of a common serving girl in the Eastern Palace did not attract much attention. It was just that there was an extra body on Jingle Hall's burning ground. There was a girl in the embroidery bureau who was lucky enough to obtain the opportunity to enter the Eastern Palace to serve the Empress. The Empress continued to listen to Hong Zhu's jokes every day. The Empress Dowager continued to eat vegetables every day. The Crown Prince continued to learn how to govern a country every day and then went to Guangxin Palace to ask the eldest princess for advice. Everything was as usual. As long as it is a big clan, if someone attacks from the outside, it will not be destroyed immediately because it has a strong foundation. However, if there is a problem within the clan, and people start to attack each other, suspicion and internal strife will become the norm, then the day of death will not be far. On the newly built earthen dike in Yingzhou, Fan Xian watched the river below the dike roll toward the east. Deep in thought, he said, "A 1,000-li dike can be destroyed by an ant's nest. A 1,000-year family can be destroyed by a thought." He turned his head to the dark-faced Yang Wanli and said, "I'm not just talking about the river dike you built or the Ming family. I'm also talking about the world." Fan Xian did not make his words clear. He calculated the time. Today should be the day the serving girl died. After a few more days, when the rumors spread and the emperor noticed the strange death of the serving girl in the Eastern Palace, given his suspicious nature, he would certainly find many problems. The tranquility and harmony of the royal family on the surface might cause an unexpected upheaval because of the death of that palace maid. "I'm seriously asking for your monthly votes here. In a few hours, the doubling of the monthly votes will end, and the friends behind me have narrowed the gap by 600 votes in one night. I'm feeling a little tight. I want to be in the top 3 this month, and these few hours will play a very important role. So, please throw the votes in your hands over to me, and tamp down the soil and stones. Thank you, thank you." Chapter 493. Yang Wanli glanced at Fan Xian beside him and said, "Teacher, the Jiangnan matter has been settled. You don't have to worry too much." His words were spoken with sincerity and sincerity. Yang Wanli had experienced more than half a year of wind and rain on the river embankment and wrangling and shirking in the river transport governor's yamen. He had long gradually understood the true meaning of being an official and the difficulties of the people's lives. As an official, if they wanted to work for the people and share the burdens of the court, they had to have power and money in their hand. Otherwise, they couldn't do anything. Because Yang Wanli had Fan Xian as a backer, no superior in the Ministry of Works dared to order him around. Although the River Transport Governor's Yamen was still a mess, he had the power to directly take silver from the palace treasury. Thus, in this area, no one could create obstacles for him. He was no longer the pure young man who dared to make a ruckus at his students with a wave of his sleeves. Every time he thought of this, he deeply admired the lesson his teacher had taught him by West Lake in Hangzhou. At this moment, the endless river embankment beneath their feet was Yang Wanli's achievements in this 1 year. Every time he looked at the square stones and yellow earth and the tamed river water below the embankment, his heart was always filled with fulfillment and pride. The patched clothes on his body and his dark face all became a symbol of glory. Yang Wanli knew that the reason he was able to achieve his dreams in life was because of Minister Fan and Sir Fan Jr.'s meticulous care and guidance. Thus, he was both happy and worried about his teacher's arrival, which was why he said the words he had said earlier. Everyone under heaven knew that Fan Xian had been attacked on his way back to the capital. Yang Wanli was very worried about his teacher's health. Fan Xian shook his head and looked at the river water under his feet. "It's fine. Don't think too highly of me. I am a lazy person. I won't be busy with government affairs and harm my health. As for the Jiangnan matter, the Ming family's weakness has long been grasped. Naturally, they have no power to retaliate. However, if they want to take them all in one bite, it will still be difficult." Yang Wanli could understand the meaning behind these words. It was not difficult to take out the Ming family. What was important was the members of the royal family behind the Ming family. If he did not have to worry about the situation in the palace, the Ming family would have long been taken out by him. Fan Xian smiled and did not go into detail about the specific situation. He only comfortingly said, "Returning to the capital this time has been fruitful. Although the emperor has not made up his mind to clean up the bureaucracy, the change in the court has already begun. You should have seen Qing Jialin's name on the court bulletin." "Yes, Brother Jialin is the first of the 4 of us to return to the imperial court," Yang Wanli said happily. The investigation into Fan Xian's assassination had ended without any result. The Qing emperor had used the opportunity to chase away some old people and install many new people into the court. The least famous of Fan Xian's 4 disciples, Qing Jialin, had met him respectfully and jumped ranks to be promoted. Presently, he was already the vice-director of the Ministry of Rights and a target of the court's training. Fan Xian glanced at him and smiled. "Of the 4 of you, Jialin is the most silent and moderate. It is because of this that his path has been smoother than Jichang's. Of course, Jichang's problem is also mine. If I had not called him to Jiaozhou, he would not have sunk into this kind of stalemate. I just hope he doesn't blame me." Yang Wanli shook his head and said, "Teacher, what are you saying? Jichang has also written to me about the Jiaozhou matter. This is an important matter, and only Jichang can handle it." Fan Xian nodded. Since the 4 of them knew of his painstaking efforts, then he didn't need to explain any more. The 2 of them walked downstream along the long river embankment. As they walked, they chatted. Fan Xian reminded him, "I know about your matters in the River Works Yamen, and the court also knows. Now that the title of desperately working for Wanli has entered the palace, it will be of great benefit to you in the future. However, you still have to remember what I said back then. For things like river works, if you know how to do it, then work hard. Don't randomly give orders for things you don't understand." Yang Wanli smiled and replied, "After spending a year on the river embankment, even if I don't understand something, I understand a little." Fan Xian glanced at him disapprovingly and said, "The river works are a major matter, even more important than the battles on the western Hu and northern Qi borders. If you only understand a little, how can this little be enough to support you to say such confident words?" Yang Wanli immediately understood and shamefully accepted the lesson. Of course, it is impossible to stop the river disaster in a mere year's time. Fan Xian suddenly furrowed his brows and said, "This is a 10-year work, or even a 100-year work. As long as people live on the two sides of the river, they will have to work for as many years. You have to stop being arrogant and impatient. You should be willing to be lonely." "Yes, teacher. However, you also have to pay attention to raising a few capable subordinates and specialists," Fan Xian said sincerely. Fan Xian sincerely said, "Although you have the desire to benefit tens of thousands of people, you've been exposed to wind and rain for a long time. I'm afraid your body won't be able to take it. You've raised capable people, so don't stay in the River Works Yamen anymore. Go back to the capital and work seriously." Yang Wanli was startled and quickly explained, "Teacher, I don't want to go back to the capital. The capital is much more troublesome than the embankment. Besides, I'm not afraid of hardship. I've long gotten used to it." "Of course, the capital is troublesome, but if you want to work, you have to go back to the capital," Fan Xian said resolutely. Fan Xian said resolutely and decisively, "This has nothing to do with whether or not you can endure this hardship. I still hope that you can live a few more years. You're already so old, yet you haven't even taken a wife. What kind of rumors would it be if it got out?" Yang Wanli was vexed and didn't say anything. Speaking of which, it was strange. Fan Xian was younger than all four of his students, but during these 2 years, when they occasionally ran into each other and Fan Xian put on the airs of a teacher to lecture them, he had become more and more used to it. This was probably what was meant by changing places and nurturing one's temperament. In the next few days, Fan Xian continued to linger in Yingzhou. Most of the time, he was on the river embankment pointing and discussing with Yang Wanli. However, he could not avoid being invited to a banquet by the River Works Governor's Yamen. Fan Xian could refuse a normal local official, but this time, the River Works Governor had personally come to invite him to a banquet. This kind of face was rare. The governor's reason for inviting Fan Xian was simple. What the River Works Governor's Yamen lacked was silver. Fan Xian was in charge of the palace treasury, and had plenty of silver. This year, the River Works Governor's Yamen had smoothly repaired the river and received great rewards from the emperor. It was because Fan Xian, both openly and secretly, had invested great enthusiasm and countless silver into this yamen. The governor could not help but be endlessly grateful for this kind of favor. What Yang Wanli found strange was why his teacher had remained in Yingzhou. Of course, the imperial envoy of Jiangnan Road could inspect the construction of the embankment. Looking at Fan Xian's appearance, he was prepared to stay for half a month. "Teacher, are you not going to Suzhou?" One day, Yang Wanli gathered his courage and asked. "There's no rush. I'll wait a bit longer." Fan Xian smiled. Jingdou was in the north, and Suzhou was in the east. He sat steadily in Yingzhou, coldly watching what was about to happen in the two places. It was like a porter carrying 2 loads of thorny fruit. He just happened to place the carrying pole on his shoulder to support the weight, but he was not worried about the thorny fruits piercing his thigh. He was waiting for the Suzhou matter to first enter the main topic, and then for the Jingdou matter to explode. Yingzhou was the best place to watch the show. Although he was very repulsive in the eyes of the officials under heaven, at such a sensitive time, he still needed to avoid arousing suspicion. The Qinian unit of the Overwatch Council in Jiangnan had 2 leading figures. One was Su Wenmao, who managed the production of the palace treasury in the 3 workshops in North Min. The other was Hong Chongqing, who kept an eye on the Ming family's movements in the Palace Treasury Transport Company in Suzhou. The movements against the Ming family had actually been laid out a year ago, and the true movements had begun half a year ago. On one hand, Zhaoshang Money House vigorously transferred silver to the Ming family to support their channels and daily needs. They also began to provoke Ming Lansher to open up a new business route. At the same time, they also made a move against the 6th master, who only liked sumo wrestling. That muddle-headed sixth master only knew that Zhaoshang Money House had borrowed a lot of silver from him to spend, but he had never thought that his shares in the Ming family had long become a few pieces of paper in Zhaoshang Money House. All of this was carried out in the open. Even if Zhaoshang Money House were to press for a debt, given the Ming family's powerful strength, the goods in their hands as collateral, daily cash flow, and the support of Taiping Money House, they would still be able to deal with it. They would not be forced to liquidate and use their business shares and land to pay it off. Thus, the problem that had been placed in front of Fan Xian was how to quickly reduce the value of the Ming family's cash flow and cause serious problems for the Ming family's cash flow. Against such an enormous business of the Ming family, no matter how much money they had, it would still be difficult to achieve this goal. However, the problem was that Fan Xian had full control over the palace treasury. He had a death grip on the supply of goods. It was the same as having the Ming family by the throat. The first to act was Su Wenmao. With the full cooperation of the deputy of the palace treasury transport envoy, Ren Shaoen's cousin, and the skillful arrangements of a few old shopkeepers in Qingyu Hall, the production of the 3 large workshops in the palace treasury had gradually and steadily increased since the end of last summer. The quality had also increased greatly. With more goods sold, there would naturally be more to eat. The Ming family would not let go of this opportunity. Additionally, during this time, the Overwatch Council's harassment of the Ming family had been greatly relaxed. Thus, the entire Ming family business had come to life. In a moment, they had swallowed up countless goods and sent them in the direction of Dongyi and Quanzhou. Although such a large amount of goods had used up a great deal of the Ming family's money, Ming Qingdao was not worried. Once they changed hands, there would be money coming in. This was also the reason why he felt so relaxed during that time. If it continued like this, what wonderful days it would be. However, the 3 large workshops of the Palace Treasury Transport Company had suddenly stopped for some reason. After the news of the stoppage reached Suzhou, Ming Qingdao flew into a rage. He had Ming Launcher quickly go to the Palace Treasury Transport Company Yamen and ask what had happened. Hong Qingda shamelessly accepted his questions. He was only willing to say that the 3 large workshops were undergoing routine equipment maintenance and needed to wait for a few hours. The Ming family had the right to be angry and roar because he was a royal merchant who had bid out tens of thousands of liang of silver. Since the palace treasury had accepted his bid, they had to ensure his channel of goods. Otherwise, he could go to court before the emperor. However, Hong Chongqing also had an excuse to delay. The goods the 3 large workshops had shipped last year had already fulfilled their share of the bidding document. Even if they stopped for 10 days to half a month, the Ming family would have already received all the goods they should have received. Ming Qingda had no choice. He could only use the power of the officialdom to find out the real news in Minchu. With great difficulty, he came back with news. He heard that the 3 large workshops had started a strike again. Sir Su of the Overwatch Council had chopped off the heads of over 20 people before barely managing to suppress it. However, this would delay work for many days. Only after learning of this reason did the Ming family let out a breath. As long as it was not Fan Xian's scheme, it was fine. They began to wait for the day the palace treasury would resume work. The reason the Ming family was so impatient and nervous was all because everything had been going well in the past 2 months. The Ming family had gradually come to accept the palace treasury's ability to deliver goods. Based on the daily amount, they had signed large contracts with Dongyi and overseas. The contracts had already expired. The Ming family needed large amounts of goods. What merchants needed was credibility. The Ming family would rather lose money than not have any goods to sell. After another few days, the 3 large workshops finally resumed work. However, there was not much of the various goods they produced. It was like trying to put out a cart of firewood with a cup of water. No one knew when they would return to last year's situation. For a moment, the Ming family sank into a small panic. In order to complete the contracts, They had no choice but to move goods from all over the place. Not only did they move the last of the family's reserves, they also had no choice but to borrow some goods at a high price from the shops on the north and south roads. After receiving the account's master's report, Ming Qingda estimated the amount of cash available to the family. He furrowed his brows and said, "What exactly does Fan Xian want to do? Does he want to destroy me just by taking a few days of my goods? That is too childish." Ming Lansher listened to the side with a bitter taste in his mouth. These few days, he had secretly moved a sum of silver from Zhaoshang Money House in preparation to participate in the illicit salt business. His partner this time was Jiangnan's largest salt merchant, Yang Jimei. Furthermore, he knew that Yang Jimei and Governor Xueqing had a close relationship, so Ming Lansher was not worried about anything. However, the return on the illicit salt would take at least 3 months. If his father knew that he had moved the family's cash flow to another place, would he still be as confident as he was now? "The Ming family doesn't have anything else, but we have silver," Ming Qingda smiled coldly. "If Fan Xian wants to control the price of goods on the market to eat our silver, then we'll give it to him to eat. In any case, he'll still have to spit it all back out in the future. We must complete this order." However, the Overwatch Council's actions were not as simple as controlling the price of goods. On the second day after the Ming family successfully gathered the goods at a high price, the workers of the 3 workshops became excited as if they had taken ephedrine. The palace treasury's operations suddenly exploded. There was not a trace of a strike. In a very short amount of time, they reached a new peak in daily output. Although the prices of the goods sold by the royal merchants were set by the court, the selling prices were controlled by the upstream suppliers. At this moment, the prices of the goods had dropped, but business was much better. The Ling and Xiong family, Sun family, and even Xia Mingji had made a lot of money from this wave of market prices. Mainly, they had earned a lot of the difference in prices from the Ming family. The Ming family had worked hard to gather the high-priced goods and fulfilled most of the orders. However, they watched helplessly as the prices of the goods on the market dropped. They were unspeakably angry, particularly when a few foreigners who had sailed from Quanzhou shamelessly ran away and turned to Lingnan to pick up the cheaper goods. This caused the Ming family to throw away a large pile of high-priced porcelain and perfume in their hands. In just this one battle, the Ming family had lost 700,000 liang of cash flow. If this had been before, this 700,000 liang would not have been much for the Jiangnan Ming family. However, after being suppressed by the Overwatch Council with all their might for a year, the Ming family's circulation channels had long run dry. They were completely relying on the support of the Taiping and Zhaoshang money houses. Now, another 700,000 liang of cash flow had melted like snowflakes and disappeared. The master of the Ming family, Ming Qingda, had no choice but to be cautious. This order must be delivered. Although Shi Pibao is a foreigner, he also has a large foreign trading company behind him. He will not be as shameless as those islanders. He is also trustworthy. Ming Qingda rubbed his tired eyes and said to his son below, "Lansher, this time, you will personally deliver the goods. You must be careful." Ming Lansher made a sound of acknowledgement. He also knew that this batch of goods was very important. This batch of goods was something his father had thought of every method and used countless connections to snatch from the palace treasury. The so-called trial goods referred to the goods that the palace treasury had successfully developed for the first time. Just like the strong alcohol and perfume of the past, although the price was very high, everyone knew that it was something new. Once it was sold, it could be sold like gold. The trial goods this time were a batch of mirrors. Ming Lansher had personally inspected the goods. The main material of these mirrors was glass, but the back was made of some unknown material. It was actually plated with a layer of silver. When it shone on it, it was clear to the finest detail. It was truly a treasure. Logically speaking, Given the relationship between Fan Xian and the Ming family, it would not be the Ming family's turn to make a fortune from such an important trial goods. However, the Ming family had been operating in Jiangnan for a long time. They had only bought this batch of goods through another royal merchant. However, Ming Lansher still had a bad feeling in his heart. If this batch of silver mirrors could be safely delivered to Shi Pibao's hands in Xuanzhou, the Ming family's difficult cash flow situation could be greatly alleviated. But would it go so smoothly? Don't worry about anything, Ming Qingda said with a dark expression. Ming Qingda said with a dark face, I have already communicated with the capital. You will personally escort this batch of goods. The Jiaozhou Navy has also given orders. This time we will not go out to sea ourselves. Although we will earn less, it should be safe to travel between the provinces. This master of the Ming family, who had already tolerated Fan Xian for an entire year, suddenly raised his head and said in a cold voice, If someone really dares to kill and steal the goods, we can't kill everyone. If someone escapes, we will go to the capital to fight in court. 3 days later, on a small mountain heading southeast from Suzhou, Hong Chongqing looked at the long line of carriages at the foot of the mountain and smiled. There were not many carriages carrying the silver mirrors. There were only 2 carriages, but the Ming family had sent out 500 private soldiers to escort them. Indeed, they placed great importance on this export order. However, his smile immediately faded and turned into coldness. In this moment, he thought of a year ago, the day the Jiaozhou Navy had massacred on the island. He thought of the corpse-eating seabirds and the pirate brothers on the island who had died with their eyes wide open. Although from the beginning, he had been an Overwatch Council secret agent responsible for going to the island to investigate, after spending a long time on the island with those pirates, he would always have some feelings. Thus, he stood on the mountain and looked down at the Ming family's carriages and private soldiers. A joyful and bloody smile appeared at the corner of his lips. He would not kill anyone today, but it would certainly hurt Ming Qingda more than killing these people. Just as he was thinking, a group of about 200 riders escorting a few carriages walked over from the official road directly opposite the Ming family. The 2 sides met and blocked the foot of the mountain. Ming Lansher had been carefully watching the situation on the road. Looking at this group of people, he immediately sensed a strange atmosphere. He ordered his private soldiers to pull out their weapons and prepare to meet the enemy. However, the 200 riders did not move. They only coldly brushed past the Ming family carriages. Although these riders were standing on their horses, a cold and stern aura emanated from their bodies. It made the Ming family's private soldiers afraid to move rashly. Just as the 2 carriages merged into 2 lines, the side compartments of the carriages escorted by the 200 riders suddenly broke. The carriages escorted by 200 riders suddenly had their sides broken. Everything inside spilled out and crashed onto the carriage the Ming family used to store the silver mirrors. If it was normal goods, what was there to be afraid of? The problem was, the things that smashed onto the carriages holding the silver mirrors were rolling stones, very heavy and angular rolling stones. No one dared to use their bodies to block it, not even the Ming family's private soldiers with strict orders. After a few muffled booms, there came countless fine shattering sounds. Ming Lansher screamed and quickly dismounted from his horse to check. He saw that most of the 100 or so silver mirrors had been crushed into shards of shining lenses. Although they still reflected an enchanting light, the official road at the foot of the mountain immediately descended into chaos. Countless people pulled out their weapons. The 2 sides faced each other. A great battle was about to break out at any moment. Ming Lansher's vision darkened. He immediately knew it was over. He turned his head fiercely and stared at the leader of the 200 riders. Gritting his teeth, he said, As expected, when did the proper Black Knights of the Overwatch Council do such things as killing people and stealing goods? The leader's face was covered by a silver mask. He was not surprised that the young master of the Ming family could recognize the identity of his group. They had not planned to hide their identities today. Jing Gu, the deputy commander of the Black Knights of the Overwatch Council, gazed at Ming Launcher and coldly said, "I did not kill anyone or steal goods. I was escorting the stone materials needed by the 3 large workshops of the palace treasury through here. You civilian merchants dared to block the way. The road is narrow and unfortunately overturned. Both sides have suffered losses. I don't want you to compensate, don't make a ruckus. If you anger my fierce nature, I'll take your heads carefully." Ming Launcher's gaze was slightly dim. He looked at the Black Knights, who seemed eager to try, covered in a bloody aura. He forcefully pushed down the anger in his chest. He only felt the taste of blood in his throat. With wide eyes, he said in pain and absent-mindedness, "Overturned. How could a carriage overturn so accurately in this world? Both sides suffered losses? No matter how your stone was overturned, it would not lose a corner, while mine was a fragile silver mirror." Chapter 494. In the quiet valley there was a stifling and panic, but no one dared to make a move. Of course, Ming Launcher knew that this was something Fan Xian had arranged. It had been so from the beginning, but he didn't understand. After all, the other party was an official of the court. How could he do such a shameless thing? Faced with such a terrifying cavalry, Ming Launcher didn't want to fight it out with the other party and throw away his life. However, the shattered pieces on the ground filled his mind with anger. "I'm going to Jingdo to fight a lawsuit," Ming Launcher cursed in a sharp voice. "Whatever, I won't keep you company." Jinggo coldly threw down these words and led his troops away. Before he left, he didn't forget to lift the heavy stone wheel back onto the carriage, leaving behind Ming Launcher, who wanted to cry but had no tears, the dumbstruck Ming family private soldiers, and a large pile of sparkling glass shards scattered on the ground. In the past, the Ming family had secretly raised pirates and colluded with the Jiaozhou Navy to steal ships and goods in the East Sea. They killed people like flies and harmed countless lives. They had forcefully stolen countless goods from the court. Now, Fan Xian had done the opposite. He did not act on the sea but on land. He did not harm the Ming family's lives nor did he steal their goods. He only destroyed everything so that the Ming family could not cry even if they wanted to. The cycle of nature was fair and just. It should be like this. The matter was not over yet. Wearing official robes, Hong Chongqing coughed and walked down the mountain to Ming Launcher's side. Smiling slightly, he said, "Greetings, young Master Ming." "Sir Hong?" Ming Launcher was already numb. He was not surprised to see Fan Xian's trusted aide. He just didn't know what he wanted to say to him. "My original name was Qinghua. So, I was also a brother on that island." Hong Chongqing moved closer to Ming Launcher's ear and said coldly and ruthlessly through gritted teeth, "These worthless pieces of glass are my thanks to you on behalf of Brother Mingzi, Sister Lan Hua, and the hundreds of brothers who died on the island. Don't tell me you've forgotten Sister Lan Hua, right? She was your favorite concubine." After Hong Chongqing said this, his chest was filled with the pleasure of revenge. In a loud voice he said, "Thank you." Laughing loudly, Hong Chongqing left confidently, leaving behind Ming Launcher with an ashen face and a shocked expression. He looked at his hands in astonishment. It was as if he had just remembered that he had once used these hands to end the life of a woman who was infatuated with him. The news traveled back to Ming Garden outside Suzhou. Ming Qingda's right hand trembled. The fine porcelain bowl in his hand fell to the ground with a crash and shattered into countless pieces. However, he did not feel any pain, because the crisp sound of the silver mirrors shattering into pieces had already made his heart ache so much that he could not feel it anymore. This old man suddenly felt that his heart, like the porcelain bowl on the ground, had shattered into countless pieces. "Lawsuit? I'm not afraid." He's even less afraid of a lawsuit before the emperor. Who will he find to fight for him? After enjoying himself in Yingzhou for half a month, Fan Xian waited for Wang Qinian. He finally got on the carriage and continued on toward Hangzhou. The news from the Overwatch Council had long arrived. Fan Xian raised his eyebrows. He found it funny and happy. Although he had also been able to summon wind and rain last year in Jiangnan, he had always been depressed and delayed by Mingqingda, that old fox. Now that Jingdo was at peace, he could play with the other party in the palm of his hand. It was truly a very happy matter. He had only given a general plan, but the people carrying it out were the people below him. He had not thought that Hong Chongqing would still remember the tragedy on that island and stubbornly refuse to let the Ming family die quickly, insisting on cutting flesh with a slow knife. Cutting flesh with a slow knife, boiling a frog in warm water, Fan Xian said to Wang Qinian beside him. Fan Xian said to Wang Qinian beside him, "Even I feel heartache for the Ming family. Send down the order, the time has come. Tell the children to stop playing and quickly stop." Wang Qinian had stayed in the capital for almost a month just to watch the movements in the palace. He said, "In another 2 days, the eldest princess and the crown prince will no longer care about the life and death of the Ming family. They will act before the Ming family can react. Now is the time." Fan Xian nodded and said, "What I want is for them to not expect me to be so ruthless. I'm afraid I will continue to slowly endure with the Ming family. I want to catch them off guard." He suddenly smiled and lifted the curtain in front of the carriage. Looking at the Jiangnan road that was slowly retreating, he couldn't resist the joy in his heart and began to hum a little tune. Wang Qinian listened to the strange tune and couldn't resist smiling. "Sir, is there a need to be so happy?" Fan Xian laughed loudly and said, "After holding it in for a year, I can finally let go and do things. It's hard not to be happy." When the imperial envoy's carriage and guard of honor headed toward Hangzhou at the slowest speed, the people in Suzhou all had their own thoughts. After Xueqing, the powerful governor of Jiangnan, received Fan Xian's personally written letter, he sat in his study in a daze. His 2 advisors to his left and right also knew the contents of the letter and were in the same daze as him. They looked like 3 clay bodhisattvas. Xueqing had left the capital early and traveled quickly. He had arrived in Suzhou 20 days ago and was well aware of the losses the Ming family had suffered. He had thought this was just the Overwatch Council weakening the Ming family once again. He had not thought that Fan Xian would be so confident in his letter. It was as if he was prepared to finish everything in one go. What right does Fan Xian have? It's not like this is a fight. It was clear that the Jiangnan governor, Xueqing, did not know about the shady business of Zhaoshang Money House. He was thinking hard about where Fan Xian's confidence came from and why he would inform him in the letter to have him prepare. Since the imperial envoy has said so, then he must have a plan in mind. The left advisor furrowed his brows and suggested, "The question now is, what should we do?" Xueqing sank into deep thought. If Fan Xian could truly take out the Ming family, as a trusted aide who knew the emperor's intentions, he would cooperate well. However, the problem was, he was also quite afraid of the royal power behind the Ming family. As long as there was no clear inclination in the capital, he would not make the first move. How about we do what we did last year and keep watching? The right advisor thought for a long time and could only think of a way to smooth things over. Xueqing suddenly opened his eyes and 2 beams of cold light shot out. "Watch, of course we have to keep watching, but we can't just watch. Fan Xian is only the imperial envoy of Jiangnan Road. Even if he has a way to drive out Mingqingda on the surface, it is not convenient for him to have the Overwatch Council act in secret. He has to take care of the hearts of the Jiangnan people." The Jiangnan governor finally said, "Move the provincial army to watch Ming Garden and the Ming family's 1,000 private soldiers. If Fan Xian has no way, we will continue to watch. If Fan Xian succeeds, we will have to help him take out these people. The right advisor said in a trembling voice, Sir, moving troops to kill people, if the people in the palace find out, there will be big trouble. Xue Qing waved the secret letter Fan Xian had sent in his hand and calmly said, Since he dares to do it, then he must have a grasp of the situation in the capital. This young imperial envoy is not an idiot. He wrote to tell me because he wants to share the credit with me, but this year, the Jiangnan Road Yamen has not done anything. If he wants to share the credit, then he must put in effort. Suddenly, a hurried knock came from outside the study. Xue Qing furrowed his brows. The advisor went forward to open the door. A subordinate official of the Jiangnan Road Yamen hurriedly walked in. Without time to bow, he directly reported to Xue Qing, Governor, something has happened to the Ming family. Something had happened to the Ming family? Xue Qing's heart jumped and he silently sighed at how fast Fan Xian acted. His expression remained calm and he asked, Tell me the specifics. The official swallowed and said, In the morning, the Palace Treasury Transport Company Yamen went to Ming Garden to collect a batch of accounts. The name seemed to be Silver Mirrors. Xue Qing knew the inside story of how Fan Xian had people smash that batch of silver mirrors. He furrowed his brows slightly and couldn't help feeling a bit of heartache. He asked, So what? The Ming family signed the agreement, so naturally, this silver had to be paid. These words were clearly on Fan Xian's side. When the court dealt with merchants, they were always this shameless. What's important is not this amount of silver. The official glanced at the governor and carefully said, I heard, the Ming family has a cash flow problem. A few of the money houses connected to the family have all gone to Ming Garden to press for a debt. Press for a debt? Xue Qing abruptly stood up. The Ming family had been in Jiangnan for 100 years. There were not many who dared to go to Ming Garden to press for a debt. For one, the Ming family had a lot of silver. For another, no money house wanted to offend them. Why had it suddenly changed today? Countless thoughts immediately spun through Xue Qing's mind. Had Fan Xian, after messing with the Ming family for a year, forced the Ming family to the point of no return? If the Ming family actually couldn't pay up and were forced by those money houses to sell their businesses cheaply, the family would fall into chaos. Xue Qing furrowed his brows. He knew the emperor's meaning. The Ming family would be controlled by the court, but the Ming family could not fall into chaos. Once the Ming family truly went bankrupt, never mind the tens of thousands of commoners in the family, what would happen to the Jiangnan people who were closely related to them? Taiping Money House has also gone? No. Send people to keep an eye outside Ming Garden. Hearing that the Ming family's largest partner, Taiping Money House, was not involved in this matter, Xue Qing's heart was slightly at ease. However, his expression remained dark. He ordered, Tell those people, the court does not care about the dispute between the Ming family and the money houses, but the Ming family cannot fall. Fan Xian and Xue Qing were the same. They both understood the emperor's meaning. The Ming family had to be eaten, and they had to be eaten whole. Their table manners could not be too ugly. They couldn't let the Ming family's own strength fall too much and affect the stability of the entire Jiangnan. Thus, he would not watch as the Ming family fell. Ming Qingda also could not watch as the Ming family fell. Thus, he did not have the intention of clearing out the debt this time. He only wanted to obtain some great benefit. The reason why a few money houses went to Ming Garden together to ask for money was purely because Fan Xian still held onto a glimmer of hope, to be able to hide the master behind Zhaoshang Money House. In this world, those who owed money were always more reasonable and confident than those who lent it out. Thus, the current master of the Ming family, Ming Qingda, held a slightly warm teacup and slowly sipped the tea. He couldn't even be bothered to raise his eyelids. Although the people sitting below him were the representatives of the various money houses and were his creditors in name, The shopkeepers of the money houses did not have the self-awareness of being debt collectors. They sat wretchedly on the chairs and only dared to put a third of their buttocks on the chair. Occasionally, they would raise their eyes to glance at the master of the Ming family. A glimmer of fear would flash through their eyes. They did not look like they had come to collect debts. The shopkeepers of the money houses knew they were all ant. As long as the master of the Ming family moved his finger, he could crush them to death and chase them out of Jiangnan. However, they had no choice but to come today. The ups and downs the Ming family had experienced over the past year had already made them worried. Additionally, they had been provoked by others. Today, they had all gathered in the Ming family's guest hall. They represented capital. Although it was not a lot of silver, it was still capital. Capital cared about itself the most. What it could not tolerate was loss. Particularly during this month, everyone knew that the Overwatch Council's attacks on the Ming family had increased again. The Ming family had continuously suffered losses. The recent scrapping of the silver mirrors and the palace treasury transport company's forced silver this morning had finally successfully crushed the psychological defenses of these money house shopkeepers. An old shopkeeper had a pained expression and respectfully said, "Master Ming, the Ming family has dominated the Jiangnan business world for nearly a century. If they say they still don't pay up, that is something no one would believe. However, there have been a lot of rumors in the market recently. We always want to ask you to give us a definite answer." A definite answer? Ming Qingda furrowed his brows in disgust. These shameless leech-like things. Usually, when they came kneeling to his door, he couldn't even be bothered to look them in the eye. Now, they dared to come to ask him for an answer. The old Ming master did not care about these money house shopkeepers at all. Even if the Ming family's cash flow was difficult right now, it was more than enough to pay off this amount of silver. Out of the corner of his eye, he only lightly glanced at the shopkeeper who had been sitting quietly at the very back. That shopkeeper was the head shopkeeper of Zhaoshang Money House. Behind him stood a handsome young man. Not many people knew about the relationship between Zhaoshang Money House and the Ming family. Zhaoshang Money House's reputation in Jiangnan was not very well known, so he sat at the very back. Ming Qingda had a bad premonition in his heart. What was Zhaoshang Money House doing here today? He had no interest in saying anything more to these shopkeepers. He picked up his teacup to send off the guests. At the same time, he coldly had these people go to the accounts room to clear off all the debt. The Ming family could not endure such humiliation. After the great joy in the hearts of the money house shopkeepers, they were shocked. First of all, they had finally gotten their money. Although they had lost some interest, they were shocked to see the Ming family's generosity. Was there a problem with the rumors they had received? All of the shopkeepers retreated. Ming Qingda tilted his head and looked with interest at the shopkeeper who had not moved all this time. In a quiet voice, he said, "I know they were all persuaded by you to come." The head shopkeeper of Zhaoshang Money House smiled warmly and did not refute these words. Ming Qingda furrowed his brows slightly and said, "Speak, what do you want?" They were both old foxes who had floated in the business world for countless years. From their cooperation this year with Zhaoshang Money House, Ming Qingda knew that this unknown head shopkeeper of the money house must have been a ruthless character in the past. At this moment, all of the miscellaneous small fries had left, so the two of them spoke much more directly. Ming Qingda knew how much silver the Ming family had transferred to Zhaoshang Money House. If Zhaoshang Money House had also joined the ranks of the debt collectors earlier, the Ming family could only sell their land and houses. Even if they managed to survive this time, the family's strength would be greatly damaged. Since the other party had been silent until now, it was certainly not to laugh at the Ming family. They must have other requests. Given the promissory notes in Zhaoshang Money House's hands, they indeed had the right to ask for something from the Ming family's hands. The head shopkeeper smiled slightly and said, "Master Ming, my master wants to cooperate with you." "Cooperate?" Ming Qingda's eyes narrowed. A cold light flashed and was immediately restrained. What kind of cooperation would it be for a money house to cooperate with a merchant? He closed his eyes and thought deeply for a moment. In a quiet voice he said, "No." Although the word "no" was light, it was powerful and resonated, leaving no room for doubt. The head shopkeeper seemed to have not expected the Ming family to refuse so directly. After a slight pause, he still smiled and said, "No, it has to be possible." Ming Qingda opened his eyes abruptly and stared at the shopkeeper with a gaze of pity and disdain. His cold voice seeped out from between his teeth. "You are threatening me?" "I wouldn't dare," the head shopkeeper of the money house said warmly. "It is only a request." Ming Qingda once again sank into deep thought. He didn't ask what the other party was relying on to threaten him. He had borrowed a lot of money from Zhaoshang Money House this year. This was enough to give the other party a bit more confidence in his words. The head shopkeeper said slowly, "Business is business. Master Ming, you also know the present situation. If the money house uses the notes to demand silver, the Ming family's cash flow will immediately be cut off. What will you use to provide for the palace treasury's subsequent silver? Sir Fan Jr. is waiting for you to be unable to produce the silver. Then he can cut off your right to travel east. Although the Ming family is rich and powerful, you can't lose your identity as a royal merchant, and you can't lose the silver flowing out of the palace treasury." Ming Qingda fell silent. He knew the other party had hit the nail on the head. The Ming family's biggest problem was that their cash flow was gradually showing signs of drying up. It is written clearly on the transfer of silver. Before the time is up, don't even think about taking back a single tael of silver. Up until now, Ming Qingda still did not panic at all because he had enough confidence. Unexpectedly, the head shopkeeper of Zhaoshang Money House smiled slightly and said, "Who says I can't take it back? It is written on the contract that if the money house is willing to pay a shallow price, you must return the silver within 5 days. This lawsuit, even if it goes all the way to Jingdo, I will still win. You must still return the silver." Shallow price. Ming Qingda abruptly stood up. An expression of disbelief appeared on his tired face. Lowering his voice, he scolded darkly, "You're crazy! You're going to lose 30%. The head shopkeeper's expression did not change. "If we really can't work together, even if we lose 30% of the silver, our money house will still ask you to return the silver ahead of time." Ming Qingda stared at him coldly as if trying to determine whether or not the other party was a madman. He slightly relaxed his tone and said, "If we really do this, the Ming family can at most sell our land. It's not like we can't pay you back, but your money house's losses will be great. This proves our determination and sincerity." The head shopkeeper smiled warmly. The shopkeeper smiled warmly and said, "My master has always been in the money house business, but he is very interested in your country's business. He is an ambitious person and is willing to cooperate with a hero like you, so please do me the honor." Ming Qingda slowly sat down. He finally understood. It turned out that the master of Zhaoshang Money House had wanted to borrow money to join the Ming family's business a year ago. This scheme had been set up for too long. "Who is your master?" "On the day the agreement is reached, the master will certainly come personally to thank you, Master Ming." "What if I really don't want to?" Ming Qingda had already recovered his calm. He lightly said, "A lawsuit is fine. The Ming family will accompany you all the way. As for this silver, we can at least drag it out for a year or so." "Can it really drag it out?" The head shopkeeper smiled warmly. "A lawsuit before the emperor is just a joke. According to the first 3 rules of Qing law, you should understand that a lawsuit for a private loan can at most reach the Jiangnan Road Yamen until it reaches Sir Xueqing. Are you sure you want to do this?" Of course, Ming Qingda did not want to do this. The court had been watching his family like a tiger for an entire year. If they ran into this kind of lawsuit, they would certainly think of a way to kill him. He had not thought that Zhaoshang Money House had already calculated all the escape routes and understood the conflict between the Qing court and the merchants so clearly. Ming Qingda's finger trembled slightly. He stared at the head shopkeeper and roared in his tired old heart, "This is a conspiracy." After a long silence, Ming Qingda said tiredly, "How does your master want to work with me?" "Debt to silver and shares," the head shopkeeper said cleanly. Chapter 495. Winter had passed and spring had not arrived. Last night, a gust of cold wind swept past. The newly born laziness outside the walls of Ming Garden immediately froze to death, suffused with an inauspicious white. Ming Qingda closed his eyes slightly. He had long guessed that the other party would choose this plan. Furthermore, if he put aside the humiliation of his family being schemed against, if the owner of Zhaoshang Money House actually bought into the Ming family's shares, the two sides would become one. Their funds would immediately become plentiful, and their future development would be limitless. They wouldn't even have to look at the faces of Dongyi and Taiping Money House anymore. Ming Qingda's mood warmed slightly. He thought for a moment and then said, "How much?" 30%. The head shopkeeper let out a breath and raised his face with a warm smile. 30% of all. The government will establish a contract, a death contract. Ming Qingda's mood, which had just gotten a little better, immediately sank into boundless anger and mockery. He gazed at the head shopkeeper and said with disdain, 30%? Has your owner not seen the world? A trifling 4 million liang of silver, and you want 30% of the Ming family? You misunderstand, the head shopkeeper said respectfully. The head shopkeeper said respectfully, 30% of the total is the shares of the Ming family. The total does not include the shares of the nobles in the court. Although my master is ambitious, he does not have such a large appetite and courage. Ming Qingda laughed coldly. The eldest princess and the Qin family had a large amount of shares in his house. If the 30% you said included the amount of shares, then that would be great. Let's see how you die in the future. However, the other party wanted the other 30%. This amount was too much. It is not worth that much, he said coldly and prepared to send the guest off. The head shopkeeper smiled slightly and said, "The Ming family is the wealthiest in the world and controls the people of Jiangnan. They have vast acres of fertile land and countless properties. Of course, this trifling 4 million liang of silver is not just this amount. However, times have changed. Something like cash is not the same as asset. It is the same liang of silver, but at different times it has different values." He continued, "If this 4 million liang of silver was in the past, it would only be 1 year of the Ming family's cash income. Of course, it would not be worth 30% of the shares. However, the Ming family is currently short of cash flow and needs cash to meet an emergency. After my owner becomes a shareholder, he will provide great financial support. This 4 million liang represents an even more important value. To exchange it for 30% of the Ming family's shares is not greedy. Old master is also a wise man. Of course, he knows that the price offered by my boss is already quite fair." Ming Qingda was silent for a moment. He knew the other party was speaking the truth. This is a serious matter. Although I'm the clan leader, I can't make a decision on my own. I need to think about it. He picked up his teacup. The manager of Zhaoshang Money House and the young man behind him left. Ming Launcher walked in from the side. He looked at his father and said anxiously, "Father, you can't give it to them." Then he said indignantly, "Now I know that this Zhaoshang Money House is King evil. You've actually been plotting against our family's business since a year ago." Ming Qingda glanced at his son and shook his head unhappily, disagreeing with his words. Business is business. If it weren't for the support of Zhaoshang Money House this year, our family's days would have been even worse. an IOU of 4 million liang of silver, in addition to the support of subsequent cash flow, in exchange for 30% of the shares is indeed, as they say, a very fair price. But, Ming Qingdao waved his hand tiredly. In the negotiations with Zhaoshang Money House, he had appeared confident, but he had been retreating step by step. It made him doubt himself in the depths of his heart. Had his confidence waned after being repeatedly attacked by the Overwatch Council this year? Had he knelt in front of Fan Xian once and endured and retreated countless times? Had he lost a certain boldness, and was he used to being led by the nose by others? But he was the current master of the Ming family. Ming Qingda slowly said, "Business is business, but since Zhaoshang Money House is using underhanded methods, why should we pretend that our hands have always been clean?" Ming Launcher felt a cold sweat pour out of his back. He stuttered, "Father, once the matter fails, it will be a death sentence." Ming Qingda smiled coldly and said, "With the eldest princess protecting us, even Fan Xian would not dare to act recklessly. A mere Zhaoshang Money House, what does it count for?" "But Zhaoshang Money House certainly has accounts in Dongyi." Ming Launcher looked at his father and suddenly felt a wave of coldness. He felt that his usually incomparably wise and far-sighted father was now gradually becoming stupid and angry. "It doesn't matter." A glimmer of savagery flashed through Ming Qingda's calm and wise eyes. He coldly said, "Dongyi's people asking for money from the Qin kingdom, who has the patience to care?" How about? Ming Launcher muttered to himself. "How about we sell the land and the estate? Although this amount of silver is a lot, it's not like we can't pay it back." Ming Qingda said darkly, "What you can think of, how can they not think of? The court strictly forbids private buying and selling of land. If it was for a small sect, it would be fine, but to sell so much land, how could it not alarm the government? All the procedures would take at least a year. Zhaoshang Money House would rather lose 30% to repay the debt ahead of time. What is it for? Isn't it to force us to split the shares?" The old man's heart suddenly sank. He thought of the law the court strictly controlled the buying and selling of land. It was one of the new policies forcefully pushed through when the mistress of the Yi family was alive. Ming Launcher left with an ashen face. He guessed what his father would do, but he didn't know how. He only knew that his father had finally lost his reason under the pressure of the Ming family facing a storm this year. Although he still maintained a thread of clarity with great difficulty and thought it was better to work with Zhaoshang Money House, he did not dare open his mouth to persuade him to do anything because of the matter he had kept hidden. That night, on the bluestone street of Suzhou City, there were suddenly some rustling sounds. It was as if rats that had been trapped in their holes for a long time in winter had suddenly smelled the fragrance of delicious pastries, borrowing the cover of the night to come out of their nests. However, there were only 3 rats. 3 aces wearing black night walking clothes easily broke through the defenses of Zhaoshang Money House and killed their way into the back hall. The security of the money house had always been tight. Additionally, with Zhaoshang Money House's identity behind the scenes, they had secretly invited a number of Jianghu aces. However, this kind of defensive power could not stop the thunderous attack of the 3 night walkers. From this, it could be seen just how powerful these 3 night walkers were. The most terrifying thing was the long sword in the attacker's hands. The sword seemed to be imprinted with some kind of magic. It broke through the air without a sound, and the sword did not return. It pierced forward like the anger of the 9 heavens had descended. Its momentum was indomitable and never looked back. In a moment, it left behind a dozen bodies in the back of the money house and a pool of blood on the ground. No one had the time to scream or cry for help. However, these 3 brilliant swordsmen encountered a great obstacle in the back garden of the money house. They clearly saw the box of loan receipts the head shopkeeper of Zhaoshang Money House held tightly in his arms, but they were unable to stab the tip of their swords into the other person's throat. Even the leading ace among the 3 could not do it. This was because the peerless green sword in his hand that could split mountains and rivers was currently surrounded by a green cloth that seemed weak but actually contained boundless power. With 3 rips, the swordsman pulled back his sword. Clasping his hands together, he bowed to the young man holding the green banner. There was dignity in martial arts. Having reached such a stage in assassination, it had become a contest of martial arts. The green banner had already been twisted into countless pieces by the brilliant and steady sword intent. The words, Tai Xiang written on it had also become a small black dot on the shredded cloth. The young man who had once gone by the name of Tai Xiang and now went by the name of 13th Wang held the bare banner staff in his hand and looked at the black-clothed man holding the green sword with the air of a master. He slowly lowered his head and bowed in return. "Please." The black-clothed man took off the cloth covering his face. His expression was solemn. His 3 strands of light beard fluttered slightly. He held the sword sincerely and poured all the energy in his body into it. Even with 13th Wang's fearless and carefree nature, he couldn't help but be moved when he suddenly saw this person's face. If Fan Xian was there and saw the black-clothed man's face clearly, he would probably also immediately turn and leave without a moment's delay. Yun Jilan, the first disciple of Dongyi's Sigu sword and a 9th-level master of sword technique. 13th Wang's right hand gripped the banner staff tightly. His pupils constricted slightly. He was very nervous. The 2 night travelers who had followed Yun Jilan into the back garden of Zhaoshang Money House were aces from Dongyi. Seeing Yun Jilan holding his sword and facing the chaos, they respectfully retreated to the side. In their hearts, although the young man holding the banner had an unfathomable cultivation, as long as he was not a great grandmaster or a strange figure like Fan Xian, he would not be defeated by one of Yun Jilan's attacks. 13th Wang looked at him in a daze and suddenly said, "Is your injury better?" Yun Jilan furrowed his brows slightly and slowly said, "Do you know me?" Last spring, Yun Jilan had gone to Jiangnan alone. One reason was to secretly watch his female disciples train. The most important goal was to find an opportunity to assassinate the Jiangnan Road imperial envoy, Fan Xian. However, the ending of the matter was rather painful. A master of sword techniques had only sat on a fishing boat and glanced at Fan Xian from a distance upstairs before falling into the Overwatch Council's ambush. Even now, Yun Jilan still could not forget the sword light that had appeared like a ghost in the water. He felt a secret chill because that sword light that came and went like a ghost had caused him the heaviest injury he had suffered since he began his journey. However, the news of his injury had always been tightly controlled. Presumably, the Qing court did not want to cause a diplomatic storm. Thus, when 13th Wang asked if his injury was better, Yun Jilan felt surprised. 13th Wang smiled somewhat helplessly and said, "You are a swordsman of a generation. How can you become a thief?" Yun Jilan smiled and said, "Are you any different? Even if you killed everyone in Zhaoshang Money House and burned these deeds, you still wouldn't be able to help the Ming family." 13th Wang sighed and said, "What is left here is only a copy. The original is not in Suzhou. If the original is in Dongyi, it will probably be gone by tomorrow," Yun Jilan slowly said. Yun Jilan slowly said, "I don't know where you come from, but the Ming family is too important to Dongyi. I ask that you do not obstruct me." 13th Wang said, "Ming Qingda is finished." Before he finished speaking, the black-clothed person who had been waiting quietly by Yun Jilan's side said, "Teacher, this person is stalling for time." 13th Wang was slightly startled. He realized that this black-clothed person was a woman. Her voice was very clear. Involuntarily, he tilted his head and smiled. "Cece is also here?" The black-clothed person's body shook. Yun Jilan also looked curiously at 13th Wang. He sighed and said, "I didn't expect you to know so much about my school. I am truly curious. Unfortunately, there isn't much time." Someone from the Suzhou government is about to arrive. He slowly raised the sword in his hand. The tip of the sword trembled slightly as he pointed it at 13th Wang's throat. "You won't kill me," 13th Wang said. "Why?" Because 13th Wang's expression suddenly became solemn. His left leg took half a step back. The green banner and lone staff suddenly came crashing down. His left hand gripped the end of the staff from behind his back. His right hand pressed down. The tip of the staff pressed down with a force. The sound of breaking wind suddenly rose and then stopped. It only cut out a line in the air. What a powerful sword intent! Yun Jilan's pupils constricted slightly. Slowly, he asked, "Who exactly is the owner of Zhaoshang Money House?" 13th Wang hesitated for a moment and then slowly pulled back the green banner. He opened his mouth and silently mouthed. The shock on Yun Jilan's face disappeared in an instant. He smiled helplessly and didn't say anything more. Turning around, he left the rear courtyard with his 2 female disciples. Just as he was about to leave the rear courtyard, he suddenly turned around and said, "Brother disciple, take care. Fan Xian is more sinister than you think." 13th Wang smiled bitterly and said, "Brother disciple, if you tell Ming Qingda, trust that I will certainly have the opportunity to see how Fan Xian slowly kills me." Yun Jilan did not turn his head. His shoulders were as steady as cast iron. After a moment of silence, he said, "He used such a large benefit as a gambling stake to test how loyal you are to him. I don't understand." "I also don't understand," 13th Wang slowly said. "Perhaps he is very confident that even if I betray him, he will still have a way to destroy the Ming family. He is only letting me take charge of this matter and conveniently see my attitude." Yun Jilan said, "What exactly does teacher mean? Is the Ming family more important, or is Fan Xian's trust in you more important? Only then can I decide what to do." "Sir Fan Jr.'s trust is the most important," 13th Wang said sincerely. "Even if I join hands with you and tell Ming Qingda the truth of the matter and help the Ming family survive this disaster, what about next time? In the end, the palace treasury is Sir Fan Jr.'s. Teacher does not mind establishing some kind of friendship with a child from a foreign country." "Then, you shouldn't have told me just now," Yun Jilan slowly said. 13th Wang smiled and glanced at the head shopkeeper of Zhaoshang Money House, who was holding a document and had a face full of wariness. "Even if I didn't tell you, no one knows whether or not I would inform you in secret. So, it was better to tell you face to face. Looks like there won't be any action in Dongi." Yun Jilan sighed. He was not sighing that he had made a wasted trip. Rather, he was admiring the deep scheming beneath his teacher's foolish appearance. It was not until today that he found out that the most mysterious brother disciple had been following Fan Xian to do things ever since he left the hut. "Yes." 13th Wang lowered his head and said, "Presently, I am the one attacking, so, please step back for now and maintain your silence." "I can step back, but why should I be silent?" Yun Jilan calmly asked. 13th Wang took out a small jade token from his clothes and showed it to him. Yun Jilan saw this jade token and immediately sighed. He shook his head and smiled. "The sect always knew you didn't have a sword token. Unexpectedly, teacher gave you this one. In this world, everyone and all the factions were sitting on the fence. Dongi was, without question, a towering tree. If he fell to any side, it could produce an unexpected result and he would never be able to float back. Thus, Sigujian could not fall. His sword had to protect Dongi. He had to have a complete understanding of the situation in the Qing kingdom before he made a decision. Perhaps, he would only act if there was a sufficiently powerful and fatal temptation. Because of Fan Xian's sudden rise, he had to show sufficient sincerity on Fan Xian's side. Part of his attitude was 13th Wang. He had also reserved a portion of his attitude on the eldest princess's side, such as Yun Jilan. Only by doing this would he be able to obtain a corresponding benefit regardless of which side won within the Qin kingdom. This was grasping with both hands. Both hands had to be strong. Tonight's surprise attack on Zhaoshang Money House had caused Sigujian's two hands to clasp together and begin to compete. Probably even this great grandmaster had not expected this situation. Fan Xian had attacked first, so Yun Jilan could only retreat. However, he didn't need to remain silent. He could tell Ming Qingda the truth and have him reject Zhaoshang Money House's investment. However, he had seen his teacher's sword token, so he understood which side the great grandmaster was leaning toward in the current situation. Zhaoshang Money House was completely silent. The faint smell of blood came from the front yard. The face of the head shopkeeper of the money house, who had been on guard earlier, had long recovered its calm and warmth. He bowed solemnly to 13th Wang, who was holding the green banner in a daze, and respectfully said, "Congratulations, Sir 13th, on passing." 13th Wang tilted his head in a daze. A moment later, he sighed and said, "The hearts of humans are truly complicated. Teacher and Fan Xian are truly two very interesting people." Out of habit, Ming Qingda once again turned his gaze to the trees outside the high walls of Ming Garden. He felt a bit desolate in his heart. Winter had clearly ended, and the spring wind had already brushed his face. How could the green and tender branches that had sprouted a few days ago be frozen to death again? He knew that the situation placed in front of him and his family was like a harsh winter. The Ming family had a century-old foundation. How could it be played to death so easily? However, ever since they had become royal merchants that distributed palace treasury products, the Ming family had earned a lot and sunk too deep. They could not pull themselves out. Gradually, it became a place for the various powers in the court to wrestle. No matter how strong the merchants were, how could they stand up to the court's tricks? Regardless of whether it was the suppression this year, the manipulation of the prices a few months ago, or the vicious and somewhat shameless act of throwing rocks at silver mirrors, the Ming family had paid too much blood and sweat and lost too much power. The entire family business was becoming more and more difficult to operate. If he could escape, the Ming family could still survive. However, he could not escape, so he needed to solve the problem. The most pressing problem placed in front of the Ming family was the lack of cash flow and a serious lack of cash flow. To solve this problem, they needed outside support. However, Taiping Money House was not a bottomless pit. It could not forever give blood to the Ming family. It was said that there were already people in Dongyi who were raising objections. As for that damned Zhaoshang Money House, Ming Qingda furrowed his brows and began to cough. He coughed until there was a tearing pain in his chest. If Zhaoshang Money House did not want 30% of the Ming family's shares and had enough bargaining chips in their hands, Ming Qingda would not have made such an irrational reaction. He was even willing to enter into a deeper level of cooperation with Zhaoshang Money House. After this storm, they could join hands and earn all the silver in the world. But he wanted his family property? This touched Ming Qingda's bottom line. This was the family property he had obtained by kneeling down to kill his mother and begging for glory. How could he hand it over with both hands for 4 million liang of silver? However, the current Ming family indeed could not pull out the silver to pay back this 4 million liang of silver. Even if Zhaoshang Money House used a shallow price to pay off the contract, Ming Qingda still could not take out close to 3 million liang of silver. He coughed even harder. A glimmer of gloominess, loss, and submission flashed through his eyes. Yun Jilan once again took his people and left. However, last time, this great swordsman had been injured by the Overwatch Council. This time, he had left confidently. The difference between the two made Ming Qingda smell a great danger. The night before, although many people had died in Zhaoshang Money House, the account books and promissory notes had not been stolen. There was no movement in the operations in Dongyi. On the contrary, The Jiangnan Road Yamen had rushed to take over the Zhaoshang Money House murder case and stationed heavy guards. At the same time, the Ming family's private soldiers were all closely watched by the provincial soldiers of the Jiangnan Road governor, Xue Qing. Ming Qingda knew that he could no longer use thunderous methods. Being watched by the court, he could only think of a way through business. To solve the Ming family's current crisis, he could only choose to lower his head. He tiredly said to the concubine beside him, "Go invite the people from Zhaoshang Money House over. Go personally. Make sure your attitude is better." Chapter 496. The Cece I wrote about yesterday was Yun Jilan's disciple, the female swordsman Lu Cece of Dongyi. She had once appeared in Hangzhou in the first volume, but she was just a minor character. She was not the same person as the one in Fan Xian's family. That Cece is pregnant, how could she kill people? Ming Qingda glanced at her coldly and said, "Mother doesn't know you were once the eldest princess serving girl, but you know I know this very well, so there is no need to purposely remind me of anything. Her Highness and I have always been on the same boat, so I am not planning to leave." He paused and felt that there was no need to vent his anger on this woman. He shook his head and said, "The letter has long been sent to the palace. The eldest princess will certainly have a way to delay Fan Xian's hand. If the eldest princess had free time, of course, she would have enough schemes and arguments in court to delay the Overwatch Council's advance on the Ming family. The problem was, everyone was actually very busy right now. The head shopkeeper of Zhaoshang Money House sat coldly in the luxurious flower hall in Ming Garden. The tea by his hand had not been touched. His right hand was wrapped in bandages. No one knew if he had been injured in the battle the night before. That was then and this was now. The day before yesterday, Zhaoshang Money House had taken the initiative to discuss business with the Ming family. Today, after the Ming family's secret attack was ineffective, they had helplessly taken the initiative to ask. Thus, the attitude of this head shopkeeper was clearly different. Ming Qingda secretly watched the other party's expression from the back. He thought that although this head shopkeeper was angry, he still came. Presumably, the owner behind the scenes of the money house did not want the matter the day before to affect the large business between the two sides. He was just about to lift the curtain and go out when he found that his sleeve had been pulled. Turning his head in shock, he saw that his favorite son, Ming Lansher, had a deathly pale face and wanted to say something. Ming Qingda furrowed his brows and scolded in a low voice, "What time is it now? If you have something to say, then say it." Ming Lansher glanced into the hall and his expression became even uglier. Pulling on his father's sleeve, he entered the back hall. Without another word, he knelt down with a thud in front of him. "I am unfilial, please, father, kill me." Ming Lansher gathered his courage and raised his head. "We must not let Zhaoshang Money House use the transferred silver to exchange for shares." Ming Qingda was silent for a moment. He then slowly opened his lips and asked, "What exactly happened?" Ming Lansher lowered his head in shame and said, "I privately transferred a batch of silver to Zhaoshang Money House. I used half of the shares in my hands as collateral." Ming Qingda sucked in a breath of cold air. His expression became extremely ugly, but he immediately recovered his calm and hurriedly asked, "When can the silver be returned? What contract? Can we find Taiping to transfer the contract?" These were a few key questions. Because the matter concerned the ownership of the Ming family's shares, Ming Qingda had no time to scold his son. He rushed to ask them first, hoping that Zhaoshang Money House wouldn't gain another 5%. "Death contract," Ming Lansher said with a sad face. "As for the money back, I originally thought it would be 3 months, but now it looks like not a single cent will be returned. Taiping should know of this matter. They will not accept it." The Ming family had been in the wind and rain for a year. Fan Xian had relied on the production of the palace treasury to choke them until they could barely breathe. The young master of the Ming family was just as he had said to his father that day. He had always thought that he should adjust the general direction of the Ming family's business. Only by doing this could they not forever be toyed with by Fan Xian. Because of Ming Qingda's insistence, Ming Launcher could only secretly carry out his own experiments. At the end of last year, he used his 5% shares in the Ming family to exchange for the silver support of Zhaoshang Money House. He had thought that this attempt would allow him to obtain a large profit in a short amount of time and convince his father. Ming Qingda's mind buzzed and he almost fainted. A moment later, he panted slightly and asked, "Just what kind of business is it? How can it not return a single cent of the capital?" Ming Launcher looked at his furious father and hesitated for a moment before saying with a trembling voice, "It is the illicit salt business." Ming Qingdao was startled and didn't say anything for a moment. There were always only three most profitable businesses in the Qing kingdom. One was the brothel business, one was the palace treasury's royal merchants, and one was a large family that sold illicit salt. Among these three, selling illicit salt returned the fastest and had the highest profit. Why can't it return the capital? Ming Qingda stared coldly into his son's eyes and said each word clearly, "I know you are a steady person. Even if it is a highly risky illicit salt business, you must have a way to protect your capital. Tell me, why can't it return the capital?" Because Ming Launcher wanted to cry but had no tears. A few days ago, the Salt and Tea Yamen suddenly began an investigation. I don't know how they found out the news and seized all 12 ships of illicit salt. I went to find someone, but there was nothing I could do. He didn't notice his father's increasingly ashen face and continued to explain. Those related checkpoints and yamens have always been well taken care of by the family. I had no idea they would suddenly act. Besides, Yang Jimei has always walked that path. He promised me that it would be fine. A crisp slap rang out. Ming Qingda gave Ming Launcher a fierce slap and forcefully slapped him to the ground. Ming Launcher covered his numb face and half lay on the ground. He felt blood trickle out of his mouth. Looking at his father, who was as angry as a sick lion, he couldn't say anything. "Yamen? Yamen. You also know that's a yamen. The Salt and Tea Yamen doesn't dare to investigate the family. But wouldn't the Overwatch Council force them to investigate?" Ming Qingda roared in a low voice. His eyes were filled with disbelief, dejection, and rage. "Yang Jimei, is there something wrong with your brain? That salt-selling laborer is one of Xueqing's dogs. The place Fan Xian lives in Suzhou is his garden." Ming Qingda's chest felt a wave of coldness. He kicked his son and gritted his teeth as he cursed. "How did I raise such a stupid prodigal son like you?" With great difficulty, he calmed his emotions and said weakly, "Did you leave anything behind in the salt business? Be careful that the Overwatch Council uses this crime to execute you." "Father, please don't worry." Ming Launcher struggled to kneel in front of him. "That batch of silver came directly from Zhaoshang Money House. Although that dog Yang Jimei knew it was me, the government couldn't find any evidence. If Zhaoshang Money House brought your contract with them to court, then the government would have evidence." Ming Qingda sighed helplessly. Ming Launcher's heart suddenly chilled. This money house, it wouldn't be Fan Xian's, would it? Ming Qingda's body trembled. A moment later, he silently shook his head. "It can't be Fan Xian's. The eldest princess has investigated the Ministry of Revenue in the capital. We have also kept a close eye on Fan Xian. He doesn't have that much silver to do this." These words were simple, but the effort behind it was great. The Ming family wanted to do business with Zhaoshang Money House. Of course, they had clearly investigated the background of Zhaoshang Money House and confirmed that Fan Xian had no connection to Zhaoshang Money House. However, Ming Qingda had not thought that although the results of his investigation were correct, the owner of Zhaoshang Money House was indeed not Fan Xian. The owner was the young emperor of Northern Qi. Everything starts from being cautious. Ming Qingda raised his head and barely managed to control his emotions of failure. Giving up 30% is letting down our ancestors, but it can let us delay for a while longer and wait for the backup plan in the capital. However, the Ming family's gradual decline and eventual destruction these 2 years was actually because of this delay. After a long time, when the head shopkeeper of Zhaoshang Money House yawned for the 20th time, the current master of the Ming family, Ming Qingda, walked out with a gloomy face. The head shopkeeper smiled slightly and said, "Master Ming, you've made people wait for a long time." Ming Qingda did not raise his hands in greeting, nor did he say anything else. Coldly, he asked, "Bring over the contract for Lan Shi's half of the shares. Cancel all the books, and I will agree to your owner's request." "Yes, Master Ming." The head shopkeeper's expression still did not change. He took out a document from his clothes and presented it in front of Ming Qingda. It was the contract Ming Lanshi had left behind to collect the silver from selling salt. It seemed that he had long been prepared. Without waiting for Ming Qingda to speak, the head shopkeeper said in a quiet voice, "Cancel that portion when we get back." Ming Qingda nodded his head weakly. In the afternoon, the various accounts masters of the Ming family and Zhaoshang Money House filed in. The wealthy merchants that the head shopkeeper had strongly requested to come to watch the ceremony also sat to the side. The official notaries sent by the Suzhou government had also finished their preparations. 3 pieces of white paper were spread out on the table. An ink brush danced in the air. In a flash, 3 debt transfer documents were written. The wealthy merchants of the Suanxiong family and the elderly people in Suzhou, who were watching from the side, looked for a while before they understood what was written. They couldn't help but repeatedly suck in a breath of cold air with an unspeakable shock. Zhaoshang Money House invested in the Ming family 30% of the shares. Although the major figures in Jiangnan had long seen the Ming family's predicament, no one had expected that the Ming family, which was as rich as a country, would be in such a difficult situation. It could not be said to be at the end of the line. But to use 4 million liang of borrowed silver to exchange for 30% of the Ming family's shares? The merchants pondered it for a while and remembered that the Ming family's current predicament was mainly focused on cash flow, so they immediately understood this point. On the contrary, they felt that Zhaoshang Money House's asking price was very fair. Ming Qingda raised his brush and was silent for a moment. Without any pretense, he calmly signed his name and pressed his fingerprint on it. Everyone watched this scene silently. Regardless of whether they were friend or foe of the Ming family, they all felt incomparable admiration for the shrewdness and boldness of the old Ming master. For a century-old family to give 30% to outsiders, only an extraordinary person would be able to do such an extraordinary thing. The person representing Zhaoshang Money House to sign and press his fingerprint was a young man. A young man with a pretty face who stood behind the head shopkeeper of the money house the entire time. No one had noticed his existence. It was not until now that they all came to their senses and cast strange gazes, thinking, was the mysterious owner of Zhaoshang Money House this unknown young man? Ming Qingda finally furrowed his brows and said, "So, you are the owner of the money house. Forgive me for my rudeness the other day." It was no wonder he couldn't see it. 13th Wang's carefree and relaxed aura truly did not seem like an ambitious and ruthless figure in the business world. There wasn't even a glimmer of the feeling of someone in a superior position. 13th Wang was slightly startled. He didn't know whether or not he should admit it. He didn't know whether or not Fan Xian would remain behind the scenes. At this moment, there was a clamor at the door of Ming Garden. Immediately after, there was the sound of the middle door opening. Immediately after, the second door opened again, and the third door opened. The clamor traveled directly into the hall where the signing was being done. The hurried footsteps came quickly, even faster than the sound of the singing. They carried a glimmer of dominance and arrogance. Ming Qingda furrowed his brows tightly and gazed out of the hall. He didn't know who had come. The footsteps were light and fast. The owner of the footsteps was in an unusually light mood. Fan Xian, dressed in the black robes of the Overwatch Council, stepped over the long threshold and walked in. There was a pleased smile on his face. Behind him followed Hong Chongqing and the other Overwatch Council officials, as well as Xia Qifei, the seventh young master of the Ming family. He didn't greet the officials and merchants. Instead, he walked directly in front of Ming Qingda and looked at the old man with an unfathomable gaze. After looking for an indeterminable amount of time, Ming Qingda furrowed his brows slightly. Looking at the imperial envoy who was rumored to still be in the Shazhou area, he asked, "Imperial envoy, you have graced us with your presence." Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, "How could I not come to such a grand event, particularly since I still have to say thank you to the old Ming master." "Thank you?" Ming Qingda's heart trembled slightly. "Thank you for your 30% share." He moved closer to Ming Qingda's ear and used a voice only he could hear to quietly say, "Zhaoshang Money House is mine." Ming Qingda furrowed his brows slightly and wondered if he had heard incorrectly. Fan Xian looked at the documents on the table where the ink had not yet dried. A happy smile bloomed at the corners of his lips. He had painstakingly planned for a year and endured silently for a year. Finally, he had seen results today. How could he not be happy? Although he knew that revealing his identity would make it impossible for Zhaoshang Money House to hide from the eyes of the court, this was something that would happen sooner or later. He also needed to use this limelight to let the little northern Qi emperor earn enough and stop. Although under the emperor's gaze, Fan Xian might have to bear a loss of over 1,000,000 liang of silver, he did not care about this. The Ming family that had roamed Jiangnan for 100 years, dominated the court and the Jianghu, and controlled the lives and deaths of countless commoners, had changed owners today. How could Fan Xian miss such a grand show? Spending 1,000,000 liang of silver to buy a theater ticket to be able to see this scene with his own eyes was truly worth it. He looked at Ming Qingda, whose expression changed endlessly. He narrowed his eyes and thought naughtily that if the old Ming master suddenly fainted, then this theater ticket would be even more worth it. It was as if the heavens had heard his thoughts. Ming Qingda looked at the head shopkeeper of Zhaoshang Money House, standing behind Fan Xian, and watched as the young man handed the contract into Fan Xian's hand. He finally understood everything. However, he still could not understand. The Ministry of Revenue could not have emptied the national treasury. Where did Fan Xian get so much silver to start a money house? Ming Qingda's entire body trembled. His eyes were slightly red. His throat made a gurgling sound, but he could not speak. His blood and qi attacked his heart. His body straightened and then collapsed. Chapter 497. Let me say a few words before I write. With the arrival of the disaster, the situation in Wenchuan may be better than I thought yesterday, but I have finally confirmed that the epicenter of the earthquake is near Yingxiu. Of course, I am completely fine in Hubei. I am just very worried over there and my emotions are very unstable. Many people know my feelings for Yingxiu. At the turn of the century, I lived there for half a year. Even now, I cannot forget the town and its amiable people. Today, at noon, I finally received news that the army had broken into Yingxiu. In that instant, my feelings were complicated. The rims of a man's eyes immediately became wet. There is a brother called Gao Yuanjing. At this time, he should still be in the Futong factory. For some reason, he put his hands together and prayed, hoping that everything is safe, hoping that Yingxiu can turn misfortune into fortune, hoping that Wenchuan can bring people another pleasant surprise, hoping that the people suffering in the disaster area will suffer less. Sichuan is safe, the entire country is safe, everyone is safe. A book friend suggested a donation. Please choose your own way to express your love. The Red Cross donation channel is very easy to find, so I won't go into detail. Here, I wish the book friends in Sichuan and their families good health. In the near future, if there are willing friends, please go donate your blood and help those who are injured. Thank you. The laughter did not continue for long before it stopped. Fan Xian suddenly realized that he had been too proud and arrogant. It was not a good sign. The unconscious Ming Qingda also woke up. The large robe under the silk and cotton coat moved without any wind. His fists were tightly clenched. His eyes were slightly red as he stared fiercely at Fan Xian's face. The laughter stopped, and the unconscious person woke up. It was as if the earlier scene had not happened. In reality, everyone knew that 30% of the Ming family's shares had already fallen into Fan Xian's hands. If it was only 30%, it was still far from enough. Ming Qingda looked at Xia Qifei standing behind Fan Xian and thought of the 10% in his hands. He then thought of the fourth master of the Ming family, who was gradually distancing himself from the family. His heart grew colder and colder, but he still held a glimmer of hope. "See the guest out," the old man said tiredly and weakly as he glanced at the documents in Fan Xian's hands. Fan Xian did not move. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the beautiful buildings in Ming Garden with a face full of admiration. It was as if this garden had already become his. Ming Qingda's expression changed again. Xia Qifei flashed out from behind Fan Xian and glanced at his brother. In a quiet voice, he said, "See the guest out." It was the same two words of farewell, but they came from two people's lips. This represented the ownership of the Ming family and the identity of the master of the Ming family. Xia Qifei had already formally stood out and began to challenge Ming Qingda. The guests in the hall knew that today's matter had blown up. Furthermore, they didn't know what would happen next or what the old Ming master would do in his anger. In order to protect themselves, everyone quickly broke away and left. They didn't even care about etiquette. Including the Suzhou government officials who were witnesses, they quickly bowed to Fan Xian and fled the garden. The hall immediately fell silent. The people left included Fan Xian's people, as well as the men of the two branches of the Ming family. Although there were many people, they knew they were about to reveal their cards, so no one dared to make a sound. Ming Qingda glanced at Fan Xian coldly and took out a contract from his clothes. He slowly tore it apart. "Why don't you be shameless and take Launcher's 5% share as well?" Fan Xian glanced at him and shook his head. "I am an official of the court, not a merchant. Why would I want your son's shares?" He walked to the back of his group and sat down in a chair. He didn't say anything more. He only quietly admired this scene. He had rushed to Suzhou today to see this great show. He also wanted to support Xia Qifei. The Ming family had been in Jiangnan for a long time and had thousands of private soldiers under their control. If they really wanted to do something big, Xia Qifei's Jiangnan water bandits might not be able to stand up to them. Xia Qifei stood in front of Ming Qingda and smiled slightly. The owner of Zhaoshang Money House had written a letter ahead of time saying that the 30% of shares in his hands was for me to speak for. Last year, the Suzhou government ordered you to compensate me according to your discretion. You were generous and gifted me 10% of the shares. I am eternally grateful. In the future, when you die in Ming Garden, I will definitely serve you with all my heart. With his son's support, Ming Qingda barely managed to stand in the hall. He glanced at the Ming clan men behind him, and a wretched smile rose to his face. "Looks like a number of people have secretly thrown themselves to your side. Otherwise, you wouldn't speak with such confidence, speaking of which, during this year, the Ming family's energy has been used to deal with Sir Fan Jr. and neglected you." After these words were said, the expressions of the Ming clan men were complicated. Those who had already secretly thrown themselves at Xia Qifei were ashamed, while those who did not know the inside story were shocked. Only the fourth Ming master looked at the sky with an indescribable indifference. Ming Qingda took a deep breath. His face appeared incomparably old. He knew that since the other party dared to steal the position of master of the Ming family, he must have complete confidence. However, he still held onto the thought of a final struggle. He turned his head and stared coldly at the fourth Ming master. Enunciating each word, he said, "You also gave him the shares?" "A wise man submits to circumstances," the fourth Ming master slowly said. Ming Qingdao laughed wretchedly 3 times and pointed at his nose as he scolded, "Idiot! The death of the Ming family is all because of you. I want to see how you meet the ancestors of the Ming family after you die, and how you will face your mother in a moment." The fourth Ming master trembled slightly and immediately smiled coldly. His smile appeared very vicious. "Big brother, I don't have the face to meet? Last year, I was captured and thrown into the Suzhou government prison. It's fine that you didn't have people come to rescue me, but you actually sent people to assassinate me. Do you have the face to meet such a brother?" Ming Qingda stared into his eyes and said, "At the time, the situation had to be like this. I understand." The fourth Ming master smiled crazily. "You want the Jiangnan aristocrats to sympathize with the Ming family, so you want me to die in prison, but have you thought about it? I am also a son of the Ming family. Why should I die? Why don't you go and die? Why don't you go and die?" Ming Qingda's entire body trembled. He turned his head and roared at Xia Qifei in a sharp voice, "Show all your cards. Even if the third and fourth brothers, these 2 sons of concubines, have voted for you, it's still not enough." Xia Qifei glanced at him and slowly opened his mouth to say, "Zhaoshang Money House has more than 30%. More than 30%? Yes." Xia Qifei calmly said, "You know how much silver the sixth Ming master has owed outside these years. He is the matriarch's favorite youngest son. You have always been afraid of him, so you have been very stingy with his use and strictly forbade him from meddling with the family property. However, he is playful and is someone who likes to use silver, so he could only stretch out his hand to borrow from outside. He doesn't have any property, so he could only use the shares the matriarch left him as collateral." Sixth. Ming Qingda's eyes widened. He had never thought that the key to the change in ownership of the Ming family would come from his own younger brother. He turned his head in shock and looked at the terrified sixth master in the crowd, who kept retreating backward. In a daze he said, "Sixth, are you crazy?" At this moment, the sixth master's face was mournful. He half curled up and hid behind the crowd, avoiding his elder brother's murderous gaze. Under Ming Qingda's accumulated might as the master of the family, the men in the family were all scared half a step back by his murderous gaze. "It's not that he's crazy, it's that everyone in the Ming family has gone crazy," Xia Qifei said coldly. Xia Qifei said coldly, "Look at this garden. The people inside all have their own thoughts and are full of evil tricks. Including me, everyone with the surname Ming is born with selfishness and indifference. When disaster strikes, who would remember this surname? When all is said and done, the cause of the Ming family's defeat is still you. You guard against everyone in the family, yet you blindly retreat to outside pressure. How can you not lose when you do things like this?" There was silence in the hall. Ming Qingda suddenly laughed, but his laughter was filled with unspeakable despair and anger. He pointed at Xia Qifei and said, "Do you think that just because you have more than 50% of the shares, you can speak in the Ming family? Don't forget, there are shares in the palace and military shares in the Ming family property. What you can control is still not enough." Fan Xian, who had been silent for a long time, finally opened his mouth and quietly said, "Those are dry shares." The 2 words, "dry shares," made the situation clear. Fan Xian looked at Ming Qingda, who was about to sink into a state of madness, and said, "Can shares that are not on the books be openly taken out to fight a lawsuit?" Ming Qingda stared at Fan Xian's hateful and beautiful face and said, "Sir Fan Jr., Do you really dare to take the eldest princess and old Qin master's shares? Fan Xian stood up and tilted his head slightly. He thought for a moment and then smiled warmly. If I don't dare to take it, then what am I doing here today? In a quiet and secluded little courtyard in Ming Garden, Ming Qingda sat alone in front of a desk. His face no longer had much luster. It was like a copper lamp that had been boiled dry of oil. He was unspeakably haggard. This afternoon, Xia Qifei had used the shares in his hands to chase him down from his position as the master of the Ming family. At the same time, under the double notarization, or surveillance, of Jiangnan Road and the Overwatch Council, all of the account books had been sealed. All of the people in the garden had been completely changed. The previous master of the Ming family, Ming Qingda, who had endured silently for a year, could not even send out his orders. Although it had only been half a day, he knew that once he sank into this situation, it was only a matter of time before he was forgotten by the people of the Ming family and Jiangnan. Why does Fan Xian dare to do this? The old man could not understand it no matter how he thought about it. The deep wrinkles on his forehead were the color of dead ash. He muttered to himself, "The eldest princess will help me. Don't you think so?" he asked blankly. A glimmer of fear also appeared on the concubine's face. She had originally been the eldest princess' personal serving girl and had been sent to the Jiangnan Ming family. One reason was to monitor and the other was to be in charge of communication. Last year, when Ming Qingda strangled his own mother, it was through this old Ming matriarch's serving girl that he had obtained the approval of the palace. I don't know. There has been no reply from the palace. Could something have happened? Ming Qingda smiled bitterly. No wonder Fan Xian is so confident. He knew long ago that the palace would not be able to help us. If even the eldest princess is in trouble, then I am just a fat piece of meat in his mouth that he can eat at any time. For him to have come up with so many tricks, it can be said that he thinks highly of me. It's not that he thinks highly of you. Fan Xian led Xia Qifei in as he pushed open the door. Rubbing his slightly cold hands, he sat across from Ming Qingda and said, "From the beginning, you and I both knew that it would be too easy for the court to destroy the Ming family. The problem is, the court does not want to destroy you." Ming Qingda glanced at him. What the emperor wants is an intact Ming family, not a Ming family on the verge of bankruptcy, on its last breaths, and finally broken up and dead. Thus, it is indeed not easy to eat you, Fan Xian said. Furthermore, it is best if this matter can be resolved peacefully so as not to cause too many deaths and disrupt the lives of the people in Jiangnan. You know that the Ming family is a giant beast. It is not easy to tame it. He continued, "I gave you a chance, but you didn't take it." Ming Qingda took 2 heavy breaths and said, "What will you do next? You have to know that I still have nearly half of the shares in my hand. From now on, you no longer have the right to speak in the Ming family," Fan Xian said. "From today onwards, Xia Qifei will be in charge of the Ming family." Chapter 498. Life has to continue. I will not say much in the book about praying for the people in the disaster area. Thank you, everyone. He continued, as the master of the Ming family, naturally, I have to cooperate with the court in handling the case. As for any of the children in the family who have done illegal things, I have to hand them all over. Launcher. Ming Qingda stood up in fear. Correct, Ming Launcher has already been summoned to the yamen of the Suzhou government to explain the illicit salt matter. Xia Qifei stared into Ming Qingda's eyes. As for the matter of someone pretending to be a pirate, I trust it will be clear before long. Ming Qingda took a few breaths and said, "Do you know that if this continues, the Ming family will truly be finished? Even if Mother and I have once mistreated you, you are, after all, Father's youngest son, and your surname is Ming. Are you going to watch as the Ming family is destroyed in your hands?" He roared. relax. Fan Xian raised his eyelids slightly and said, "The court has no interest in business. I also understand that if the government interferes too much in this kind of business, it will only turn a golden basin into a toilet bowl. Last year, I already admonished the emperor. The court will not directly interfere with Ming Garden. Ming Garden will still be the Ming family's Ming Garden. However, this Ming Garden will be much more obedient." He spread out his hands and calmly said, "I will have the Palace Treasury Transport Company cooperate fully with the Ming family. In less than a year, you will certainly see a prosperous, no, an even more prosperous Ming family." Ming Qingda trembled and sat down weakly. In this incident that had lasted for an entire year, the Qing kingdom's officials, or more accurately, Fan Xian, had successfully gained control of the Ming family. Most importantly, the change of ownership of Ming Garden did not have much of the shadow of the government. Xia Qifei was the seventh son of the Ming family. It was perfectly justifiable for him to enter Ming Garden. Furthermore, all of his methods were business tricks. It would be much easier for the people of Jiangnan to accept. At least, there would not be many scholars and gentry marching through the Suzhou government saying that the Overwatch Council had forcefully seized the people's property. The people's property was still the people's property. However, the owner of this property was now Xia Qifei, a secret official of the Overwatch Council. Fan Xian shook his head and said, "During this year, both you and I have not been comfortable. Now that there is a conclusion, both you and I can be considered free. Although Milord is a person who likes to humiliate others, I'm sure that you're not here just to show off your achievements." Ming Qingda interrupted his words and stared into his eyes. "Presumably, you will slowly use these people to prop me up, but you can't tie me up in the garden. I can always go out." "That is what I wanted to say." Fan Xian enunciated each word clearly. "You cannot leave the garden." Ming Qingda smiled coldly and said, "Based on what?" "I am here by imperial edict to investigate the case of the Jiaozhou Navy's rebellion. Master Ming is a witness involved in the case. If you don't want to be accused of fleeing from punishment as soon as you leave the garden, you can leave." The Jiaozhou Navy case had long been finished. Fan Xian was just looking for an excuse. Ming Qingda smiled coldly and said, "Who are you trying to fool with these words? There's also the attack on Zhaoshang Money House and the assassination of Xia Qifei." Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, "In the past, the old Ming master's hands stretched too far. There were too many loopholes to grab." Ming Qingda smiled in his anger and looked at Fan Xian with great interest. "If you really wanted to investigate these cases, you could have investigated them before. Why did you have to wait until now?" "Because you were the master of the Ming family in the past. If I investigated you, it would make the entire court think that the Overwatch Council was persecuting merchants and scheming to steal wealth," Fan Xian said with a smile. "Now that you don't have this identity, it's much easier." "You seem to have missed out on one reason," Ming Qingda replied coldly. "Yes." Fan Xian sighed. "The eldest princess can't help you now. When I do things, I truly have no inhibitions and live happily." He glanced at the woman behind Ming Qingda. Ming Qingda's brows were furrowed deeply and he said, "This is also what I didn't understand earlier. If you were sure that Jingdo couldn't help me, you could directly use these methods to destroy the Ming family. Why go through so many circles?" "I said before, I want a complete Ming family," Fan Xian said. "In the past, if I had used these thunderous methods, you, as the master of the Ming family, could have moved the entire Ming family against the court. You could even have thrown Jiangnan into chaos, but now you don't have this identity. The words you say also don't have this kind of power." "Identity doesn't seem important," Fan Xian said seriously. "In reality, it is the most important thing." He smiled slightly and said, "I have to admit, your identity as a merchant is far inferior to mine. No matter what, you cannot resist the anger of the court. However, you used all your methods, silently endured your grievances, and forcefully delayed me for a year. It is truly admirable. Ming Qingda smiled slightly and said, "At least I am still the master of the Ming family. You won't let me out of the garden. Presumably, you are worried about me staying in the garden like this. How are you going to deal with me? Presumably, given your methods, you won't kill me in the heart of the storm and become the subject of gossip." "You're wrong again," Fan Xian said seriously. "I admire you, but your identity is not as good as mine. Even if you die now, you won't be able to raise much of a storm." "Of course," he said warmly. He advised warmly, "A bad life is better than a good death. I advise you to stay in Ming Garden for a few more days to recover." As he spoke, Xia Qifei's face carried a complicated expression. He took out a piece of white cloth from his clothes and gently placed it on the desk in front of Ming Qingda. Once the white cloth appeared, Ming Qingda's expression did not change, but the concubine behind him was so scared that her teeth chattered loudly. "I'll leave the white cloth here. When you have the courage to use death to oppose me, please take it and use it yourself." Fan Xian gazed at Ming Qingda and said, "But I know you don't have the courage to commit suicide, so you will continue to live according to my wishes until I no longer need you to live." A person who strangled his own mother must understand the fear of death very well. He must be very afraid of going to the underworld to see that old woman after death. It's best if you don't die because it will be very difficult for Ming Lanshe to come out of prison. If you die, the shares in your hands will be transferred to that baby, who is not even 2 years old. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said, "You know, for a child to have so much money, it is not a good thing." After saying this, he turned and left the study. Behind him, Xia Qifei carefully closed the study door without leaving a crack. The study once again sank into darkness. Ming Qingda stared at the white cloth on the desk and was silent and speechless. After a long time, he slowly said, "What a vicious wolf cub." The Ming Garden's defenses had already been emptied and replaced by the Overwatch Council. This beautiful garden sank into a quiet and uneasy atmosphere. Strangers could be seen everywhere. Now that Xia Qifei was in charge and he had Ming Garden make changes, not many people in the clan dared to oppose his orders. Ming Garden's private soldiers have already been disarmed by the provincial soldiers Sir Xueqing sent. After Xia Qifei received the news, he immediately went to Fan Xian's ear and said, "Ming Qingda's power has already been emptied. Are there any problems? Over 40 people died. Remember Sir Xue's favor." Fan Xian lowered his head and was silent for a moment. Shortly after, he raised his face and smiled. "The Ming family is finally yours. How does it feel to have revenge?" Xia Qifei lowered his head and respectfully said, "The Ming family is yours." Fan Xian shook his head in disapproval. Xia Qifei quickly explained, "What I mean is, the Ming family is the court's." Fan Xian turned his head and glared at him. "The Ming family is yours, so it is yours. When did it become the court's or mine? Do you think everything I said to Ming Qingda in the study was a lie? Don't worry. The court has no interest in the Ming family. What they want is for the Ming family to be obedient." Xia Qifei was stifled and didn't know what to say. The court had spent so much money to bring the Ming family under complete control. Was it going to be so easily handed over to him to manage? Fan Xian sighed and explained, "When standing in a different position, the things one thinks about are also different. Who is the emperor? The emperor is the ruler of the world. The people of the Qing kingdom are all his people. Since it is so, what his people have is the same as what he has. As long as this person manages this matter well, and can bring benefits to the people and the court, it is fine. If the court truly took the Ming family into their hands, what would the merchants in Lingnan and Xuanzhou think? Given the pedantic faces of the court officials, who would have the ability to manage such a large family business well? So, don't worry. Xia Qifei tasted bitterness in his mouth. He suddenly thought, the emperor is the master of the world, so he doesn't care about the people's business. But what about Sir Fan Jr.? Why is he willing to not benefit from the Ming family? Fan Xian's words interrupted his thoughts. I asked you earlier, how does it feel to have revenge? Xia Qifei shook his head in a daze. Walking in Ming Garden as the master, I don't feel anything, because this garden is very unfamiliar. I always thought that after growing up here when I was young, if I came back and regained power, I would be very happy. But for some reason, I just can't feel too happy. That's how it is for revenge. Fan Xian paused for a moment and then said, once a great hatred is avenged, you will feel that things are very boring. Xia Qifei suddenly thought of something and carefully asked, actually, my thoughts are similar to Ming Qingda's. Looking at what happened today, and looking at your arrangements this year, it seems you have been too careful. Peaceful evolution has always been a long process, Fan Xian smiled and said. Stability is more important than everything. A peaceful transition is the right path. I am only running errands for the Emperor. The Emperor has requested that there be no bloodshed, so I can only do so. He then smiled bitterly and said, besides, in the past, Ming Qingda had the help of the eldest princess and princes, as well as the support of the military. How could I be as impudent as I am now? Speaking of the eldest princess, Xia Qifei furrowed his brows and asked, what exactly do we do with that percentage of shares? Wipe it all off. In any case, it's just some things on paper and no real goods, Fan Xian instructed. Make a chart. I'm going to send it into the palace. Xia Qifei suddenly smiled bitterly. This time, we've offended the eldest princess badly. I wonder how that noble will retaliate. Fan Xian smiled and didn't say anything. In his heart, he was thinking that he had already offended the eldest princess to the extreme. As for retaliating, that noble did not have the time to think about such things. He waved his hand at Xia Qifei. These two illegitimate children began to wander through the Ming Garden, which had changed owners. Along the way, they quietly talked about the latter part of the story and admired the beautiful scenery of one of the 3 famous gardens in the world. Both the environment and the soul became wonderful. In the depths of the royal palace in Jingdo, a certain rumor had begun to spread a month ago. As long as it was a place where nobles gathered, the servants who served them always liked to gossip, tell old stories, and talk about the dark gossip of the nobles. However, this rumor was truly too shocking. It only circulated for 2 days before it silently disappeared without a trace. This was because this rumor truly did not have a head or tail. No one knew where it had come from and there was no evidence. Furthermore, although the eunuchs and serving girls had cheap mouths, it did not mean they were brainless. They knew that if it continued to spread and reach the ears of the nobles, then their little lives would certainly be gone. Rumors and gossip were a necessary ingredient in the life of the royal palace. Most of them would disappear into people's memories. No matter how sensational a topic was, without a follow-up explosion, it could not maintain its freshness for too long. The number 1 topic of the year in the royal palace also naturally disappeared like this. However, some people did not forget, particularly the most suspicious and sensitive people. On a certain night, they were still discussing this topic. Eunuch Yao quietly said, "The little bastards' mouths are all very cheap. I know what to do." Chapter 499. Many people, including Gao Yuanjing, who was mentioned the day before yesterday, are safe. Temporarily, there is no news of my classmate. I believe he will also be safe. Best wishes to those trapped in the disaster area. Originally, I didn't want to say much yesterday. But, seeing ANC in the book review section, I still had the urge to slap him. However, it was better to pay less attention to this kind of clown. Readers, live well and continue to live happily. I believe that sometimes peace is also a kind of power. It was already late at night, and the royal study was completely silent. The Qing emperor was diligent in government affairs, so he had less favor for the back palace. Tonight, he did not sleep in the back palace but slept directly in the royal study many times. Thus, the eunuchs had long prepared all the necessary tools. A light breeze crept in through the window. It clearly could not blow in through the glass, but for some reason, it still made the light in the room dim. Yes, I heard that she stole a piece of Shuiqing jade that the Empress wore when she was young. After being interrogated for a while, she couldn't deny it and found an opportunity to commit suicide. Eunuch Yao very simply and clearly told the emperor the whole story he knew and did not add another word. Shuiqing jade? The emperor furrowed his brows and seemed to be thinking about this item. After a moment, he smiled and said, I remember. That was something the Empress wore when she was young. I remember that father gave it to her family after he arranged the marriage. At that time, father seemed to have just ascended the throne not long ago. The palace was very chaotic, and this item was not of high quality. But, when she was young, the Empress liked it very much and always wore it. He furrowed his brows and pulled himself out of this rare warm memory. Indifferently, he said, I remember that it was a cloud pattern on it. Eunuch Yao remained silent. He didn't know what the emperor's mood was. Although the empress liked it, she would not go so far as to beat a serving girl to death over such a small thing. A cold smile rose to the corners of the emperor's lips. Isn't she known as the most benevolent mistress in the palace? Virtuous and kind, she has always played the role well. How could she fail in such a small matter? Eunuch Yao had clearly said that the serving girl had committed suicide out of shame, but the emperor had directly said to beat her to death. Each person in the palace was smarter than the last. Everyone knew what the truth was that these names were used to hide. Investigate what is going on in secret. The emperor picked up the memorial again and regained his composure. The royal palace had long recovered its seemingly eternal peace. No one would have thought that Eunuch Yao was leading a few old eunuchs to investigate something in secret. However, the emperor did not seem to pay too much attention to this matter, and did not ask for follow-up news for several days. Another night, Eunuch Yao respectfully reported, There is no problem with the palace maid's death. The emperor nodded and said, I know. However, on the afternoon before the incident, the serving girl went to Guangxin Palace to deliver a roll of embroidered cloth. The day before, the batch of foreign cloth the Empress had requested from Dongyi arrived. As usual, it was delivered to the various palaces the next day. There was nothing strange, Eunuch Yao added. The Emperor slowly withdrew his gaze from the memorial. He glanced at him and then lowered it again. I understand. The Crown Prince was in Guangxin Palace at the time. Eunuch Yao's head was as low as it could get. The Emperor gently placed the memorial on the table and seemed to be deep in thought. He didn't say the words, I understand. He directly ordered, have Hong Zhu come over. Hong Zhu knelt in front of the Emperor's low couch. His face was ashen, and his legs were trembling. Even the cotton robe in front of him was shaking with layers of ripples. He was not faking it. He was truly terrified. He had thought that the clue that Sir Fan Jr. had arranged was buried very deeply and seemed to have nothing to do with him. He should be able to get far away from this matter. He had not expected that he would be kneeling in front of the Emperor in the middle of the night. The Emperor didn't look at him directly and asked, A serving girl died in the Eastern Palace? Yes. Hong Zhu didn't hesitate at all. In order to show his magnanimity and sincerity, he did his best to compress his lungs, doing his best to make this reply as crisp as possible. However, the airflow was too strong. It made his voice break slightly and sounded very hoarse. The sound of his reply echoed in the royal study. It was somewhat ear-piercing and unpleasant to hear. The Emperor furrowed his brows imperceptibly and said, Lower your voice. Tell me what happened at the time. Hongzhu obediently told him how the Empress remembered that piece of jade, how she began to investigate the palace, how she found the serving girl, who conducted the interrogation, and how the serving girl committed suicide. The Emperor seemed to be listening carefully, but it also seemed like he didn't hear a single word. His gaze remained on the memorial. Casually, he asked, "When the serving girl hit the pillar, did you see it with your own eyes?" "No." Hongzhu didn't hesitate in his reply. In the depths of his heart, he cried out that he was lucky. If the Empress hadn't asked him to stay behind for other matters, he would not have agreed so naturally. The royal study sank into silence again. After a long time, the Emperor suddenly raised his head and looked at Hongzhu with a not quite there smile. "Why are you so afraid today?" Hongzhu swallowed. His face naturally revealed an expression of fear and self-blame. He knelt on the ground and kowtowed as he said in a sorrowful voice, "I have failed your grace. I didn't report the news of the serving girl's suicide in time. I deserve to die." The Emperor was startled. He smiled and scolded, "I told you to go to the Eastern Palace to serve the Empress, not to be a secret agent. Of course, you didn't have to report such a small matter to me." Hongzhu nodded his head like he was pounding garlic, but he was thinking about something else in his heart. A year ago, he had been banished from the royal study to the Eastern Palace by the Emperor, who had always favored him. In the eyes of outsiders, it was because Fan Xian had said bad things about him in front of the Emperor. Only he knew that the Emperor was only using this as an excuse to have him go to the Eastern Palace to be a gold medal spy. Furthermore, during this year, he had done well as a spy. He comforted his cowardice in his heart and forced himself to think that even the Emperor didn't know who he truly belonged to, so what if he trembled a little? The Emperor had been about to open his mouth to ask something, but he suddenly furrowed his brows and closed his mouth. Changing the subject, he said, "During this year in the Eastern Palace, how has the Empress treated you?" "The Empress treats her subordinates very generously. All the servants wholeheartedly accept her." Hongzhu's words were very artistic. The Emperor smiled and said to himself in a very low voice, "For the sake of a piece of jade, a serving girl died. Is this considered generosity?" After Hongzhu left, Eunuch Yao stood quietly by the Emperor's side, waiting for the Emperor's edict. The Emperor was silent for a long time. He then said, "Hongzhu did not lie. It seems that there was indeed nothing wrong with the serving girl's death, only—" He smiled and said, "Only, there was nothing wrong with the process." Eunuch Yao's mind shook. He understood the Emperor's meaning. Since the founding of Qing Kingdom, all kinds of strange deaths had happened in the royal palace countless times. No matter how shady a plot or blood it was, it could all be smeared with an open and honorable reason. However, often, when the reason was too sufficient and the process too natural, the death itself was worthy of suspicion. "There are some things that I do not believe." "Don't remember them," the Emperor said calmly. Eunuch Yao knelt down. "Have Eunuch Hong come?" In his hidden fear, Eunuch Yao did not hear the Emperor's words clearly. He unconsciously replied, "Eunuch Hong went out just now." The Emperor furrowed his brows and showed some displeasure. Eunuch Yao immediately woke up. Holding the front of his robe, he ran out the door. As he crossed the threshold, he almost fell. Ever since Fan Xian's 300 poems had caused a commotion at the banquet, which was also the first time an assassin had infiltrated the royal palace in nearly a decade, Eunuch Hong, who had stayed in the royal palace since the founding of the country, had become increasingly silent and low-key. He was only willing to bask in the sun outside Hanguang Palace every day. No one in the palace or court dared to underestimate him. On the contrary, because of his silence, they increasingly felt that this old eunuch was unfathomable. Even Hongzhu, the popular person in the palace, had his current position because of him. Even the Empress Dowager and Emperor maintained a certain level of courtesy toward this old eunuch. Today, the Emperor directly called him by his name and said, "Hong Xiang, what do you think?" The last time the Qing Emperor had called this old eunuch this way, it was to ask his opinion of Fan Xian. At that time, old eunuch Hong had replied that he thought Fan Xian was too fake. Only when it was important and needed eunuch Hong's opinion would the Emperor seriously call him by his name. In the eyes of a bystander, perhaps this was a form of disrespect, but the Emperor's intentions were exactly the opposite. He always thought that calling eunuch Hong eunuch would make him think of his hidden illness. Directly calling him by his name was more appropriate. Eunuch Hong's body swayed slightly. With a half-asleep and half-awake expression, he replied in a quiet voice, "Your Majesty, there are many things that don't depend on how you look. Even if you see it with your own eyes, it may not be true." The Emperor nodded and said, "My personality has always been a bit suspicious. I know this is not good and that I might see wrongly, so please help me take a look." Eunuch Hong bowed respectfully and didn't say much. The Emperor was silent for a long time. He then said, "Cheng Qian has been in good spirits this half a year. Other than the daily teachings of the Grand Tutor, he often goes to Guangxin Palace to listen to Yunrui teach him the 3 strategies of governing a country. I am curious how his body recovered so quickly." Although cracks had appeared in the royal family, at least on the surface, there were no problems. The Emperor knew very well that his sister had studied the art of politics, so he usually did not object to the Crown Prince and eldest princess being too close. He had even secretly expressed his approval. "However, sorry to trouble you." After the Emperor said this, he didn't look at eunuch Hong again. Eunuch Hong slowly bowed his body and retreated. He slowly closed the door to the royal study and walked a distance away. Turning his head back to look at the light inside, he sighed in his heart and said to himself, "Since you know you are being suspicious, then in the end, why say you are curious? Your Majesty, you should change your personality. The future of Qing Kingdom is all in your hands." A few days later, a royal doctor suddenly fell ill and died. A few days later, a noble from a distant imperial relative's manor accidentally fell off his horse on an outing. A few days later, a fire suddenly broke out in Jingdo's famous Huichun Hall. 12 people died. On the night of the fire, a wooden-faced eunuch Hong once again appeared in front of the Emperor. In an old voice, he reported, "I investigated the Imperial Academy of Medicine, and the royal doctor died. I investigated the imperial relative's manor, and the noble also died. I investigated the Huichun Hall, and Huichun Hall burned down." Tonight, the Qing Emperor did not read through memorials. He listened carefully to eunuch Hong's report. After hearing these words, a strange smile flashed across the corners of his lips. Someone wants to hide something. Regardless of whether it is in the palace or in the capital, there are not many people who can be ahead of you in everything, the Emperor calmly said. "I have always liked her methods." Eunuch Hong didn't say anything. The entire world knew about the eldest princess method. However, she had not had a chance to show them these years. If these methods were used to help the Emperor balance the court and point his sword at the world, of course, the Emperor would like it. If they were used to destroy traces and deceive the Emperor, of course, the Emperor would not like it. Eunuch Hong took out a pill from his clothes and handed it over. "I only managed to get 1 pill. The Emperor used his finger to gently play with it. With a little force, the pill completely shattered. A strange fragrance assailed his nostrils. His eyes were cold as he said, "It is indeed a good pill." Eunuch Hong calmly said, "It could be framing." "So, everything has to be seen with one's own eyes," the Emperor said. "Rest first. No matter what happens in the end, don't tell Mother." Eunuch Hong made a sound of acknowledgement and left. He knew that even with his status, there were still many things in the palace that he could not see. A light wind blew through the buildings in the royal palace. In a garden not far from Guangxin Palace, the yellow-robed Qing Emperor flashed out from behind a tree. He lowered his head slightly and felt that it was strange. Hong Xiang had clearly made such a big ruckus. Why didn't she restrain herself? However, this glimmer of doubt had long been shattered by the anger and sense of absurdity in his heart. The Emperor's eyes were filled with an emotion of failure, disappointment, and absent-mindedness. The middle-aged man did not return to his bedroom. He continued to rest in the royal study. That night, he thought for a long time. He then asked eunuch Yao, who was serving beside him, a strange question: "Will Hong Zhu know something?" Eunuch Yao shook his head nervously and tried to persuade him. He had to protect Hong Zhu's life under the Emperor's hidden rage. Only then could he do his best to ensure his own safety. "I want to kill him." The Emperor furrowed his brows. "I want to kill everyone in the palace." Then, he calmed down and ordered in an unusually cold tone, "Summon Director Chen into the palace." Eunuch Yao, who was sweating profusely in the winter, quickly left the palace and headed straight for Chen Garden to find his savior. Not long after he left, a loud crash came from the royal study. It sounded like someone had pushed over the precious 5-foot bottle. No one knew what could make the Qing Emperor, whose expression would not change even if the mountains collapsed in front of him, do something so angry to vent his interest. "There won't be any problems with Huichun Hall, right?" In Chen Garden, the old cripple, who had been sitting in a wheelchair for a long time, said to his closest comrade beside him, "I don't want to make a mistake at the last moment." The messy-haired Fei Jie said, "What problems could there be? Although Hong Xiang has personally acted, every step in the palace has been within your calculations. They won't be able to catch anything." "Very good." Chen Pingping closed his eyes and thought for a long time. The wrinkles at the corners of his eyes bloomed like chrysanthemums. He then opened his eyes and slowly said, "I am thinking of a question. Should I have Hong Zhu disappear?" This was a very strange question. The Emperor had occasionally thought of this because, in his rage, he had unconsciously wanted to kill everyone who might have guessed at the scandal of the royal family. Furthermore, he had immediately reacted and did not make this decision. Then, why would Chen Pingping want to kill Hong Zhu? Chen Pingping furrowed his brows and said, "No matter how I think about it, in this entire matter, only Hong Zhu this thread could be a problem." Fei Jie shook his head. "Although we thought of a way to let Hong Zhu see this matter, it is clear that the Emperor did not find out through this little eunuch." These 2 sentences explained a shocking truth. It also explained the great question that had been lingering in Fan Xian's mind but had nowhere to ask. Although Hong Zhu was the head eunuch in the Eastern Palace, why was he so lucky? Or perhaps, why was his luck so bad to discover the secret affair between the eldest princess and the crown prince? Turned out that even Hong Zhu was only the first pawn Chen Pingping used to make waves in the beginning. Precisely because of this, I feel that this little eunuch is difficult to see through. Chen Pingping furrowed his brows. Chen Pingping furrowed his brows and said, "He is clearly the Emperor's spy in the Eastern Palace. After knowing about this, why didn't he report to the Emperor? I had thought that it would take another 2 months before this matter could be stirred up. Perhaps he knew that if this matter got out of his mouth, he would die without a doubt," Fei Jie said. "Someone who can climb up in the palace is not stupid." Chen Pingping suddenly smiled slightly and said, "I admire Hong Zhu for being able to endure it all this time. However, the Emperor finally knows." "Very good." Fei Jie also smiled. His smile was slightly sinister. "You have a good successor. I have a good student." Chen Pingping nodded with a satisfied smile. "Up until now, I still haven't figured out how he arranged it. Just this point alone shows that he has improved a lot. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.